The 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. Chapter 1. Never outshine the master. Make those above you feel comfortably superior at all times. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister for King Louis XIV during the early years of his reign, was a generous man who loved lavish parties, beautiful women, and poetry. He was clever and indispensable to the king, yet when the prime minister died, Louis abolished the position rather than giving it to Fouquet. Suspecting he was falling out of favor, Fouquet decided to ingratiate himself by staging the most spectacular party the world had ever seen at his chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte. The nobility of Europe and the greatest minds of the time attended a lavish dinner featuring foods from the Orient never before tasted in France, followed by a promenade through the gardens, fireworks, and a play written by Molière for the occasion. Fouquet believed this display of loyalty and magnificence would secure his position. Instead, the king, a proud and arrogant man who needed to be the center of attention, felt outdone. He saw the finance minister flaunting wealth and connections, stealing the spotlight that belonged to the monarch. The very next day, Fouquet was arrested by the head musketeer d'Artagnan, charged with embezzlement and eventually sentenced to solitary confinement for the last 20 years of his life. His error was simple but fatal. In his effort to impress, he wounded the master's vanity and made him feel insecure. In contrast, the Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei found a way to turn this dynamic to his advantage. Dependent on the generosity of rulers to fund his research, he often gifted his inventions to patrons, only to receive meager payment in return. In 1610, upon discovering the moons of Jupiter, he devised a new strategy. Instead of dividing his discovery among various patrons, he focused exclusively on the Medicis, whose dynastic symbol was Jupiter. He announced that the bright stars he had found represented the Medici family ascending to the heavens with the 4 moons dancing around Jupiter, just as the 4 Medici suns revolved around the family patriarch. By linking their name to the cosmic order, Galileo gave the Medicis infinite glory. He did not challenge their authority or make them feel inferior with his intellect. He made them shine among the courts of Italy. As a result, Cosimo II appointed him official court philosopher and mathematician with a full salary, ending his days of begging. He understood that masters do not care about scientific truth or inventions, they care about their name and their glory. The reality of power remains unchanged across centuries. Those who attain high standing want to feel secure in their positions and superior in intelligence and charm. It is a deadly misperception to believe that displaying your gifts will naturally win affection. While a master may feign appreciation, he will often harbor resentment and replace you with someone less threatening at the first opportunity. You can inadvertently outshine a master simply by being yourself if they are notoriously insecure, or by taking your status for granted. To navigate this treacherous terrain, you must use discretion. If you are more intelligent than your master, seem the opposite. Act naive and make it appear that you need his expertise. Commit harmless mistakes that allow him to correct you. If your ideas are more creative, ascribe them to him in public. If you possess natural charm and wit, be careful not to become the cloud that blocks the sun. The master must always appear as the center of attention, radiating power and brilliance. By letting others outshine you, you remain in control, avoiding the victimhood of their envy. There are times, however, to be selectively cruel. If your superior is a falling star, weak and ready to collapse, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful, for he would have shown no scruples in his own climb. If he is weak, discreetly hasten his downfall. But if he remains firm in his position, bide your time and be patient. Natural power eventually fades, and if you play the game correctly, you will outlive and eventually outshine the master. Chapter 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. Be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly, for they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. But hire a former enemy, and he will be more loyal than a friend because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them. In the mid-9th century, Michael III of the Byzantine Empire placed his fate in the hands of his closest friend, Basilius. They had met when Michael was visiting the royal stables. A wild horse had broken loose, and Basilius, a young groom, had fearlessly stepped in to save the emperor's life. Michael was so impressed by this act of bravery that he immediately promoted Basilius from obscurity, lavishing him with gifts, education, and status. He believed that a man who owed him everything would remain eternally grateful and loyal. Over time, Basilius became the emperor's chief advisor and chamberlain, replacing the emperor's own uncle, Bardus, a capable but ambitious man whom Michael had begun to distrust. Michael's reliance on his friend proved fatal. Basilius, now accustomed to wealth and power, grew insatiable. The more he was given, the more he wanted, and the charity he received began to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. He eventually convinced Michael that Bardus was plotting a coup, leading the emperor to sanction his uncle's murder. With the uncle out of the way, Basilius assumed control of the army. His power eventually rivaled that of the emperor himself. One night, after Michael had drunk himself into a stupor, he awoke to find himself surrounded by soldiers. He was stabbed to death by the very man he had raised from the dust. Basilius proclaimed himself emperor, parading Michael's severed head on a pike through the streets of Byzantium. In stark contrast stands the example of Chao Kuang-yin, who became Emperor Sung of China in AD 959. He ascended the throne after years of violent upheavals where generals would routinely murder emperors to take their place. Sung knew that his own friends in the army would likely turn on him just as they had on his predecessors. To break this cycle of bloodshed, he invited his most powerful commanders to a banquet. After much wine was consumed, he dismissed the guards and spoke to the generals frankly. He told them that while he trusted them, he knew they could be swayed by their own subordinates to seize the throne for wealth and security. Terrified that they were about to be executed, the generals begged for mercy. Instead of violence, Sung offered them a life of peace and luxury. He promised them fine estates and riches if they would resign their commands and retire. The generals, realizing they were being offered a safe and wealthy exit rather than a death sentence, eagerly accepted. In one stroke, Sung disarmed a pack of potential wolves by transforming them into docile, wealthy nobles. He later applied this same wisdom to his enemies. When he defeated King Liu of the Southern Han, instead of imprisonment or death, he gave the defeated king a high rank in the imperial court. He even drank wine offered by Liu to prove his trust, turning a former rival into his most loyal subject. The problem with working with friends is that it confuses the boundaries between affection and utility. Friends often agree with you to avoid argument, hiding their true feelings. When you hire a friend, they may discover that they are not as skilled as you thought, or they may feel patronized by your offer of employment. The act of hiring them upsets the balance of the friendship. They may begin to feel entitled to your favor, leading to resentment and eventually betrayal. An enemy, however, expects nothing. When you spare an enemy or offer them a position, they are overcome with gratitude. They will work tirelessly to prove their worth and to show that your leniency was not misplaced. To survive and thrive in the game of power, you must judge people by their competence and their ability to further your interests, not by their friendly feelings toward you. Keep friends for friendship, but work with the skilled and competent, even if they are your former enemies. Without enemies, a man of power grows lazy. An opponent at your heels keeps you sharp, alert, and focused. If you have no enemies, you may even need to create one, for conflict can define your cause and clarify your reputation. Remember that you can destroy an enemy by making him a friend, but you must never let your guard down with a friend you have brought into your inner circle. Chapter 3. Conceal your intentions. Keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. If they have no clue what you're up to, they cannot prepare a defense. Guide them far enough down the wrong path. Envelop them in enough smoke, and by the time they realize your intentions, it will be too late. In the game of power, honesty is a blunt instrument that often draws blood from the wielder rather than the intended target. It is a common mistake to believe that being open and revealing your true desires will win people's hearts. In reality, it makes you predictable and familiar, stripping you of the mystery that generates respect and fear. If you declare your goals, you give your rivals a target to shoot at. To gain the upper hand, you must master the art of masking your nature and obscuring your true aims. By dangling false objects of desire and using the smoke of distraction, you can lead your victims into a trap before they even realize they are in danger. Consider the education of the young Marquis de Sévigné in 17th century France. He was handsome and eager, but hopelessly inexperienced in the art of love. He had set his sights on a beautiful countess, but his direct and clumsy attempts to woo her were failing. He sought the advice of the legendary courtesan Ninon de l'Enclos, a woman who had mastered the hearts of the most powerful men in France. Ninon saw immediately that the Marquis was too open. His adoration was suffocating the Countess and removing all the thrill of the chase. She took him under her wing and commanded him to change his strategy entirely. Ninon instructed the Marquis to feign indifference. He was to treat the Countess merely as a friend, removing the pressure of his romantic pursuit. This was the first layer of the deception, throwing the Countess off the scent. Next, to spark jealousy, he was to be seen in the company of other beautiful women at social gatherings. The Countess, seeing him surrounded by rivals, would suddenly perceive him as a prize to be won rather than a nuisance to be avoided. Finally, he was to become unpredictable, appearing at salons he usually avoided and absenting himself from those where he was expected. The strategy worked with mechanical precision. The Countess, confused and intrigued by this new elusive man, began to pursue him. But at the critical moment, when they were alone, the Marquis's natural impulse took over. He grabbed her hands and confessed his undying love. The spell was instantly broken. The mystery evaporated, he became the same boring puppy as before, and the Countess politely excused herself, never to admit him again. He had revealed his intentions, and in doing so, he lost the game. Deception requires a light touch and the use of decoys. A red herring is a false clue that drags the hounds away from the true trail. In 1850, Otto von Bismarck, then a deputy in the Prussian parliament, used this tactic to save his career and eventually unite Germany. At the time, the German states were divided, and a war against Austria seemed imminent. The Prussian king and his ministers feared war and wanted peace, while Bismarck and the military class desired war to crush the Austrians. If Bismarck openly advocated for war, he would have been ostracized by the king. Instead, at the height of the crisis, he gave an impassioned speech that stunned his allies. He spoke eloquently against the war, praising Austria and urging caution. The king, relieved and grateful that this notorious hawk was seemingly advocating for peace, appointed Bismarck as a cabinet minister. It was the foothold Bismarck needed. From this position of power, he quietly built up the Prussian military and eventually maneuvered the country into the very war he had wanted all along, leading to the humiliation of Austria and the unification of Germany. Had he announced his true intentions earlier, he would have been dismissed. By embracing a false cause, he disarmed his opponents and secured the power to achieve his real goal. While decoys distract the mind, smokescreens blind the eye. The most effective smokescreen is often a bland, unthreatening exterior. If you appear dull, ordinary, and open, people will not suspect you of having a hidden agenda. In 1910, the famous con artist Yellow Kid Weil targeted a wealthy and suspicious businessman named Sam Giesel. Weil knew that if he approached Giesel with a get-rich-quick scheme immediately, the man would bolt. Instead, Weil engaged him in a mundane real estate deal. He presented himself not as a slick financier, but as an average guy. This business transaction was the smokescreen. While Giesel was focused on the sale of a hunting lodge, Weil introduced a secondary character, a boxer he claimed to manage. The conversation naturally drifted from real estate to boxing, and eventually to a fixed fight that could yield a massive payout. Because Giesel's suspicions had been lowered by the legitimacy of the real estate discussions, he did not scrutinize the boxing setup. He was led into the trap smoothly, distracted by the smoke of a legitimate business deal, and ultimately lost a fortune on a staged fight. The blandness of the initial interaction made the deception possible. Another master of the smokescreen was Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. In the 1920s, as he rose to power, he had to contend with fierce warlords who governed the country's various provinces. One such warlord, Balcha, refused to acknowledge Selassie's authority. Selassie invited Balcha to the capital for a banquet. Balcha, suspicious of a trap, arrived with 600 of his best soldiers, armed and ready for battle. He attended the banquet, but was tense and wary, refusing to drink too much, expecting an ambush or an assassination attempt. Selassie, however, played the role of the gracious, subservient host. He treated Balcha with exaggerated deference, soothing his ego. There was no violence, no shouting, only the quiet hum of a polite dinner. This was the smokescreen. While Balcha was eating and being flattered in the palace, Selassie's agents were at the warlord's camp down the road. They did not attack with guns, they attacked with baskets of gold. They bought every rifle and weapon from Balcha's troops. When Balcha returned to his camp, expecting a fight, he found his army had deserted him, his weaponry gone. The gentle, deferential behavior of Selassie had concealed a maneuver that destroyed his enemy without a single shot being fired. To master this law, one must understand that humans have an insatiable need to trust appearances. It is too exhausting to constantly doubt the reality of what we see. Therefore, if you present a facade that is familiar, noble, or harmless, people will accept it as truth. Hide your ferocity behind a mask of courtesy. Conceal your brilliance behind a cloak of stupidity. If you can control what others see, you control what they think, and ultimately you control how they act. By the time they realize the knife is at their throat, you will have already won. Chapter 4. Always say less than necessary. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. Gnaeus Marcius, known as Coriolanus, was a legendary hero of ancient Rome. In the first half of the 5th century BC, he won many important battles, saving the city from calamity time and time again. Because he spent most of his time on the battlefield, few Romans knew him personally, making him something of a legendary figure. In 454 BC, Coriolanus decided it was time to exploit his reputation and enter politics. He stood for election to the high rank of consul. Candidates for this position traditionally made a public address early in the race, and when Coriolanus came before the people, he began by displaying the dozens of scars he had accumulated over 17 years of fighting for Rome. Few in the crowd really heard the lengthy speech that followed. Those scars, proof of his valor and patriotism, moved the people to tears. Coriolanus's election seemed certain. When the polling day arrived, however, Coriolanus made an entry into the forum escorted by the entire Senate and by the city's patricians, the aristocracy. The common people who saw this were disturbed by such a blustering show of confidence on election day. And then Coriolanus spoke again, mostly addressing the wealthy citizens who had accompanied him. His words were arrogant and insolent. Claiming certain victory in the vote, he boasted of his battlefield exploits, made sour jokes that appealed only to the patricians, voiced angry accusations against his opponents, and speculated on the riches he would bring to Rome. This time the people listened. They had not realized that this legendary soldier was also a common braggart. News of Coriolanus's second speech spread quickly through Rome, and the people turned out in great numbers to make sure he was not elected. Defeated, Coriolanus returned to the battlefield, bitter and vowing revenge on the common folk who had voted against him. Some weeks later, a large shipment of grain arrived in Rome. The Senate was ready to distribute this food to the people for free, but just as they were preparing to vote on the question, Coriolanus appeared on the scene and took the Senate floor. The distribution, he argued, would have a harmful effect on the city as a whole. Several senators appeared won over, and the vote on the distribution fell into doubt. Coriolanus did not stop there. He went on to condemn the concept of democracy itself. He advocated getting rid of the people's representatives, the tribunes, and turning over the governing of the city to the patricians. When word of Coriolanus's latest speech reached the people, their anger knew no bounds. Riots broke out all over the city. The Senate, fearing the people's wrath, finally voted in favor of the grain distribution. The tribunes were appeased, but the people still demanded that Coriolanus speak to them and apologize. If he repented and agreed to keep his opinions to himself, he would be allowed to return to the battlefield. Coriolanus did appear one last time before the people, who listened to him in rapt silence. He started slowly and softly, but as the speech went on, he became more and more blunt. Yet again he hurled insults. His tone was arrogant, his expression disdainful. The more he spoke, the angrier the people became. Finally, they shouted him down and silenced him. The tribunes conferred, condemned Coriolanus to death, and ordered the magistrates to take him at once to the top of the Tarpeian Rock and throw him over. The patricians, however, managed to intervene, and the sentence was commuted to a lifelong banishment. Before his entrance into politics, the name of Coriolanus evoked awe. His battlefield accomplishments showed him as a man of great bravery. Since the citizens knew little about him, all kinds of legends became attached to his name. The moment he appeared before the Roman citizens, however, and spoke his mind, all that grandeur and mystery vanished. He bragged and blustered like a common soldier. He insulted and slandered people as if he felt threatened and insecure. Suddenly, he was not at all what the people had imagined. The discrepancy between the legend and the reality proved immensely disappointing to those who wanted to believe in their hero. The more Coriolanus said, the less powerful he appeared. A person who cannot control his words shows that he cannot control himself and is unworthy of respect. Had Coriolanus said less, the people would never have had cause to be offended by him, would never have known his true feelings. He would have maintained his powerful aura. Power is in many ways a game of appearances, and when you say less than necessary, you inevitably appear greater and more powerful than you are. Your silence will make other people uncomfortable. Humans are machines of interpretation and explanation. They have to know what you are thinking. When you carefully control what you reveal, they cannot pierce your intentions or your meaning. Your short answers and silences will put them on the defensive, and they will jump in, nervously filling the silence with all kinds of comments that will reveal valuable information about them and their weaknesses. They will leave a meeting with you feeling as if they had been robbed, and they will go home and ponder your every word. This extra attention to your brief comments will only add to your power. Louis XIV was a man of very few words. His most famous remark is "L'État, c'est moi," I am the state. Nothing could be more pithy yet more eloquent. His infamous "I shall see" was one of several extremely short phrases that he would apply to all manner of requests. Louis was not always this way. As a young man, he was known for talking at length, delighting in his own eloquence. His later taciturnity was self-imposed, an act, a mask he used to keep everybody below him off balance. No one knew exactly where he stood or could predict his reactions. No one could try to deceive him by saying what they thought he wanted to hear, because no one knew what he wanted to hear. As they talked on and on to the silent Louis, they revealed more and more about themselves, information he would later use against them to great effect. In the end, Louis's silence kept those around him terrified and under his thumb. It was one of the foundations of his power. By saying less than necessary, you create the appearance of meaning and power. Also, the less you say, the less risk you run of saying something foolish, even dangerous. In 1825, a new Tsar, Nicholas I, ascended the throne of Russia. A rebellion immediately broke out, led by liberals demanding that the country modernize. Brutally crushing this rebellion, Nicholas I sentenced one of its leaders, Kondratij Ryliev, to death. On the day of the execution, Ryliev stood on the gallows, the noose around his neck. The trapdoor opened, but the rope broke, dashing him to the ground. At the time, events like this were considered signs of providence or heavenly will, and a man saved from execution this way was usually pardoned. As Ryliev got to his feet, bruised and dirtied, but believing his neck had been saved, he called out to the crowd, "You see, in Russia they don't know how to do anything properly, not even how to make rope." A messenger immediately went to the Winter Palace with news of the failed hanging. Vexed by this disappointing turnabout, Nicholas I nevertheless began to sign the pardon. But then, "Did Ryliev say anything after this miracle?" the Tsar asked the messenger. "Sire," the messenger replied, "he said that in Russia they don't even know how to make rope." "In that case," said the Tsar, "let us prove the contrary." And he tore up the pardon. The next day, Ryliev was hanged again. This time, the rope did not break. Once the words are out, you cannot take them back. Keep them under control. Be particularly careful with sarcasm. The momentary satisfaction you gain with your biting words will be outweighed by the price you pay. Chapter 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Reputation is the cornerstone of power. Through reputation alone, you can intimidate and win. Once it slips, however, you are vulnerable and will be attacked on all sides. Make your reputation unassailable. Always be alert to potential attacks and thwart them before they happen. Meanwhile, learn to destroy your enemies by opening holes in their own reputations. Then stand aside and let public opinion hang them. In the chaotic period of China's War of the Three Kingdoms, the great general Zhuge Liang found himself in a desperate situation. He had dispatched his main army to a distant camp, leaving himself resting in a small town with only a handful of soldiers. Suddenly, sentinels arrived with terrifying news. An enemy force of over 150,000 troops, led by his rival Sima Yi, was marching toward them. With no means of defense, Liang's capture seemed inevitable. Yet the general did not panic. He ordered his men to take down their flags, throw open the city gates, and hide. He then took a seat on the most visible part of the city wall, donned a Taoist robe, lit incense, and began to play his lute and chant. When Sima Yi arrived at the head of his massive army, he halted. He saw the open gates and the solitary figure of Liang on the wall, lost in music. Yi knew Liang well. The man was known as the Sleeping Dragon, a strategist of legendary cunning who never took unnecessary risks. The open gates, the incense, the chanting, it all screamed of a trap. Yi reasoned that the town must be filled with hidden troops, ready to ambush his forces the moment they entered. Terrified by the reputation of the man sitting calmly before him, Sima Yi ordered an immediate and hasty retreat. In reality, Liang had been defenseless. His reputation for brilliance and deception served as a shield stronger than any stone wall, defeating an army of thousands without a single arrow being fired. Reputation is a power that can be wielded like magic. It allows you to achieve your ends with minimal effort, for your past triumphs do the work for you. However, building a reputation from scratch requires aggression and creativity, as the American showman P.T. Barnum demonstrated. In 1841, a young and impoverished Barnum sought to buy the American Museum in Manhattan. He lacked the funds, and the owners were on the verge of selling to the directors of Peale's Museum, an establishment with a solid, high-class reputation. Barnum knew that in the business world, reputation was currency, and he had none. Barnum decided that if he had no reputation to trade on, he would destroy his rivals. He launched a vicious anonymous letter-writing campaign in the newspapers, characterizing the owners of Peale's as broken-down bank directors who knew nothing of entertainment. He warned the public that Peale's stock was worthless. The campaign succeeded, the public lost faith, the stock plummeted, and the owners sold the museum to Barnum. Years later, when Peale's tried to regain ground by showcasing scientific mesmerism, Barnum mercilessly ridiculed them by staging a parody performance where he pretended to hypnotize a little girl, only to have her run away laughing when he threatened to cut off her finger. By destroying his rival's credibility through ridicule and doubt, Barnum secured his own place as the premier showman of his age. We must understand that people are judged by appearances. The truth of one's character is often hidden, so the world relies on visible signs to form judgments. A slip in reputation can transform a noble deed into a crime. In ancient China, Mi Tzu Xia was the favorite of the ruler of Wei. His reputation for charm and civility was so great that when he broke the law by using the royal carriage to visit his sick mother, the ruler praised his filial piety. On another occasion, he bit into a peach and, finding it sweet, gave the rest to the ruler, who was touched by his love. Years later, however, when envious courtiers successfully poisoned his reputation, the ruler's perception shifted. The man who once rode the royal carriage was now seen as presumptuous, and the man who shared the peach was reviled for offering the king leftovers. The actions had not changed, but the reputation had, and Mi Tzu Xia was punished accordingly. To maintain power, you must protect your reputation with your life. Begin by establishing a singular quality, be it honesty, efficiency, or cunning, that sets you apart. This quality becomes your calling card, announcing your presence before you even speak. If your reputation is tarnished, associate with those of impeccable standing to wash away the stain, just as the robber barons of the 19th century collected fine art to whitewash their ruthless business images. But be wary when attacking another's reputation. If done clumsily, it can backfire, making you appear petty and vengeful. Thomas Edison learned this when he publicly electrocuted animals to discredit Nikola Tesla's alternating current system. The cruelty of the spectacle only damaged Edison's own standing. Ultimately, reputation is a treasure to be hoarded. It allows you to distract the probing eyes of others, concealing your true nature behind a facade of your choosing. It creates an aura of invincibility that keeps enemies at bay. In the social realm, where appearances are everything, a strong reputation is not merely a luxury, it is the essential mechanism of control. Chapter 6. Court attention at all cost. Everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. Never let yourself get lost in the crowd then, or buried in oblivion. Stand out, be conspicuous at all cost. Make yourself a magnet of attention by appearing larger, more colorful, more mysterious than the bland and timid masses. The great showman P.T. Barnum started his career as an assistant to a circus owner. In 1836, the circus stopped in Annapolis, Maryland. On the morning of opening day, Barnum took a stroll through town wearing a new black suit. People began to follow him. Someone in the gathering crowd shouted that he was the Reverend Ephraim K. Avery, a man infamous for being acquitted of a murder charge but still believed guilty by the public. An angry mob tore off Barnum's suit and was ready to lynch him. After desperate appeals, he convinced them to follow him to the circus to verify his identity. Once there, his boss confirmed it was a practical joke. He himself had spread the rumor. The mob dispersed, but Barnum, shaken, asked why his boss would do such a thing. "My dear Mr. Barnum," the man replied, "it was all for our good. Remember, all we need to ensure success is notoriety." The circus was packed every night. Barnum never forgot the lesson. Later, when Barnum opened his American Museum in New York, he employed a beggar to help generate publicity. He gave the man 5 bricks and instructed him to walk a circuit of several blocks. At certain points, the beggar was to lay down a brick on the sidewalk, always keeping one in hand. On the return journey, he replaced each brick with the one he held. He was to remain silent and serious. By the 4th circuit, a swarm of curious onlookers followed him. Every time he entered the museum, the crowd followed, buying tickets to see what the mystery was about. Thousands of people were drawn into the museum by a simple, inexplicable act that demanded attention. Barnum understood that crowds are like magnets. Once you create a crowd, others will join simply to see what is happening. Attention is a currency in the realm of power. At the beginning of your career, you must attach your name and reputation to a quality or image that sets you apart. This image can be a style of dress, a personality quirk, or a controversial stance. The court of Louis XIV was filled with talented and beautiful people, yet the Duc de Lauzun was the most talked about figure because of his insolence and oddities. He insulted the king and slept with his mistress, yet his sheer audacity made him indispensable. The king was so beguiled by the duke's eccentricities that he could not bear his absence. Society craves larger-than-life figures who stand above general mediocrity. Never be afraid of qualities that set you apart. Once you have the limelight, you must constantly renew it. If you become too predictable, the public will grow tired and move on to a newer star. Pablo Picasso never allowed himself to fade into the background. If his name became too attached to a particular style, he would deliberately upset the public with a new series of paintings that went against all expectations. He knew that it was better to create something ugly and disturbing than to let viewers grow familiar with his work. By playing against expectations, he kept the public guessing and maintained his hold on their attention. A second path to courting attention is to create an air of mystery. In a world that is increasingly banal and transparent, the enigmatic draws people in. Mata Hari, the famous dancer and courtesan, arrived in Paris with no money and no professional dance experience. She created a sensation not through talent, but by wrapping herself in mystery. She told conflicting stories about her origins. She was from India, she was a Javanese princess, she had learned sacred dances in the Orient. In reality, she was a Dutch woman named Margaretha Zell. Her constantly changing biography and her strange, exotic costumes kept the public fascinated. She understood that mystery invites interpretation, and as long as people are trying to figure you out, you have their attention. Mystery need not be grand, it can be woven into your daily behavior. By holding back, keeping silent, or acting in ways that do not mesh with others' perceptions of you, you create a puzzle that people cannot help but try to solve. The great Carthaginian general Hannibal used this to terrifying effect. Trapped by the Roman army in a marshy terrain, he ordered bundles of twigs fastened to the horns of thousands of oxen. At night, he lit the twigs. The oxen stampeded up a mountain, creating the appearance of a massive army moving with torches. The Roman sentries, unable to explain the bizarre sight of thousands of lights and the noise of demons, fled their posts in panic. Hannibal escaped because he created a scene that could not be read, striking fear through the unknown. There are times, however, when the spotlight is dangerous. When you are in the presence of a king or a master, you must not compete for attention. Lola Montez, the mistress of King Ludwig of Bavaria, lost her sense of proportion in London. Attending a theatre performance where Queen Victoria was present, Lola arrived late and sat in a box opposite the Queen, wearing a diamond tiara and a crimson velvet gown. The audience, following the Queen's lead, deliberately ignored her. After that night, she was ostracized from English society. Never appear overly greedy for attention, for it signals insecurity. Know when to withdraw and let others shine, especially those above you. But in your rise to power, remember, what is unseen counts for nothing. Chapter 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Use the wisdom, knowledge, and legwork of other people to further your own cause. Not only will such assistance save you valuable time and energy, it will give you a godlike aura of efficiency and speed. In the end, your helpers will be forgotten and you will be remembered. Never do yourself what others can do for you. In 1883, the young and brilliant Serbian scientist Nikola Tesla began work for the European division of the Continental Edison Company. He was an ingenious inventor, and upon meeting Thomas Edison in New York, he was hired immediately. Tesla threw himself into his work, laboring 18 hours a day to improve Edison's primitive dynamos. Edison, seeing the magnitude of the task, offered Tesla $50,000 if he could successfully redesign them. For a year, Tesla worked tirelessly, finally producing a greatly improved version with automatic controls. When he went to Edison to collect his reward, the famous inventor laughed and told him, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Instead of the $50,000, he offered a small raise. Tesla's obsession was the development of an alternating current AC system of electricity, while Edison was committed to the direct current DC system. Betrayed by Edison, Tesla turned to the magnate George Westinghouse, who funded his research and offered a generous royalty contract. Tesla's AC system became the standard, but as patents were filed, other scientists stepped forward to claim credit, arguing they had laid the groundwork. In the public eye, the invention became associated with Westinghouse himself. Later, under pressure from financiers, Westinghouse persuaded Tesla to sell his patents for a lump sum of $216,000, a fraction of their true worth of $12 million. Tesla was stripped of his royalties, his patents, and the credit for his life's greatest work. He died in poverty, a forgotten man whose name was absent from the history books of his time. Edison, by contrast, was a master of this law. He was not a profound scientific thinker. He was a businessman with a keen eye for talent and trends. He famously stated that he had no need to be a mathematician because he could always hire one. He spotted opportunities, hired the best minds to execute them, and then appropriated their work as his own. If necessary, he would steal ideas from competitors. Yet today, Edison is remembered as one of the greatest inventors in history, his name synonymous with innovation, while Tesla is often a footnote. Edison understood that the credit for an invention is as valuable as the invention itself. He knew how to ride on the backs of others to achieve a reputation for godlike productivity. The world of power is a jungle populated by those who hunt and kill, and those who feed on the kill like hyenas and vultures. The latter, less creative but often more cunning, understand that if they wait long enough, they can find another animal to do the heavy lifting for them. While you are slaving away on a project, others are watching, waiting for the moment to swoop in and claim the fruits of your labor. It is useless to complain about this injustice. Instead, you must learn to protect your own work and, once you have established a power base, become a vulture yourself. Consider the artist Peter Paul Rubens. Late in his career, he found himself overwhelmed with requests for paintings. To meet the demand, he created a factory-like studio system. He employed dozens of talented painters, each specializing in different elements: robes, backgrounds, animals. When a client visited, Rubens would clear the studio of his assistants and pretend to be working alone at a furious pace. The client would leave awestruck by the man's prodigious output and genius. Rubens took the credit for the work of many, enhancing his reputation and his wealth while conserving his own energy. There is another, more subtle application of this law, using the past. Isaac Newton famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." He built his discoveries on the work of ancient and Renaissance scientists, using their insights to fuel his own genius. Shakespeare, too, borrowed plots and dialogue from Plutarch and other writers. He knew that the past is a vast storehouse of knowledge, gathering dust and waiting to be used. By appropriating the wisdom of those who came before, you can appear brilliant and original. Why slog through life making mistakes and learning the hard way when you can utilize the armies of the past? As Bismarck said, "Fools say that they learn by experience. I prefer to profit by others' experience." To master this law, you must discard the naive notion that doing it all yourself is virtuous. It is not. It is inefficient and exhausting. Find people with the skills you lack. Hire them, put your name on their work, or find a way to take their ideas and make them your own. But be warned, you must be secure in your position before you attempt to take the credit. If you are not powerful enough, you will be seen as a thief and a fraud. President Richard Nixon's historic visit to China was orchestrated by Henry Kissinger. Yet Kissinger wisely let Nixon take the lion's share of the credit. He knew that by letting his master shine, he would secure his own position in the long run. Learn to get others to do the work, but always, always take the credit. Chapter 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. When you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. It is always better to make your opponent come to you, abandoning his own plans in the process. Lure him with fabulous gains, then attack. You hold the cards. In the early 19th century, during the Congress of Vienna, the major powers of Europe gathered to divide the remains of Napoleon's fallen empire. Napoleon himself had been exiled to the island of Elba, a humiliation designed to strip him of dignity. Yet even in exile, his shadow loomed large. The other European leaders were nervous, sensing that the monster was not truly finished. Talleyrand, Napoleon's former foreign minister and a master of political intrigue, was the only one who seemed calm. He understood something the others did not: the power of baiting an opponent. Talleyrand knew that Napoleon was a man of immense ambition and impetuosity. He also knew that France was weak and exhausted. If Napoleon were to escape and return to power, he would likely lead the country into a war it could not win, ultimately destroying himself. Working quietly, Talleyrand manipulated events to encourage Napoleon's escape. He subtly fed the exiled emperor information that the French people were clamoring for his return. He allowed Napoleon to believe that the English would look the other way if he fled. Talleyrand was setting a trap, baiting the bear with honey. Napoleon took the bait. He escaped Elba, returned to France, and for a brief, delirious period known as the 100 Days, he ruled again. But the result was exactly as Talleyrand had foreseen. Napoleon rushed into battle at Waterloo, where he was decisively defeated. This time, his enemies took no chances. He was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, from which there was no return. By luring Napoleon into making a move before he was truly ready, Talleyrand controlled the game and ensured his rival's final destruction. He set the house ablaze to save it from the plague. The essence of power lies in retaining the initiative. When you are the one reacting to others, you are on the defensive, expending energy to catch up. Aggressive leaders often mistake bold action for effective action, but they are frequently just reacting to the moves of their enemies or the consequences of their own rash decisions. The truly powerful leader stays back, keeps calm, and makes others come to him. When you force your opponent to come to you, you control the terrain, the timing, and the terms of the engagement. You make him waste his energy on the journey, arriving exhausted and ill-prepared, while you are fresh and ready to strike. During the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, the Japanese admiral Togo Heihachiro used this principle to devastating effect. The Russian fleet was stationed in the Baltic Sea, thousands of miles away. By spreading disinformation and baiting the Russians into believing they could easily wipe out the Japanese navy, Togo lured them into a long, arduous voyage. The Russians had to travel around the tip of Africa, a journey of thousands of miles that exhausted their crews and strained their resources. When the Russian fleet finally arrived in the Tsushima Strait, they were tired and demoralized. Togo, who had been waiting in his home waters, rested and prepared, annihilated them. He made his enemy come to him, and in doing so, he won the war. The principle of making others come to you applies not just to warfare, but to negotiations and daily interactions. When you make a request or demand a meeting, you are the supplicant. But if you can maneuver the situation so that the other person requests the meeting, the dynamic shifts. You are now the one granting the favor. By holding back and creating a sense of scarcity or mystery, you can compel others to seek you out. In the violent world of 19th century American finance, Daniel Drew was a master of this art. He would walk through an exclusive club near Wall Street, seemingly in a hurry, and accidentally drop a slip of paper from his pocket. On the paper would be an inside tip about a stock. Club members, believing they had stumbled upon secret information, would rush to buy or sell the stock, playing right into Drew's hands. He didn't have to sell them on his scheme, he just had to drop the bait and let their own greed do the rest. However, there is a flip side to this law. While it is generally wiser to make others come to you, there are times when a sudden, aggressive strike is necessary to demoralize an enemy and force them onto the defensive. If time is against you, or if your enemy is weak and disorganized, hesitation can be fatal. In such cases, you must seize the initiative and strike before they can react. But for the most part, patience and the strategic use of bait will serve you better. By mastering your own emotions and playing on the greed, vanity, and impatience of others, you can make them dance to your tune, exhausting themselves while you preserve your strength for the final, decisive blow. Chapter 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. The momentary satisfaction gained from winning an argument is rarely worth the resentment it breeds. Words are slippery and subjective, easily misinterpreted by those whose pride is at stake. When you corner an opponent with logic, you may win the point, but you often lose the person. The ill will generated by a verbal victory smolders long after the conversation has ended, often manifesting later in acts of sabotage or defiance. True power lies in the ability to prove your point without uttering a single word. By demonstrating your correctness through action, you disarm your opponents, allowing them to save face while you secure the victory. In the 2nd century BC, the Roman consul Publius Crassus dives. Mucianus was laying siege to the Greek town of Pergamus. Needing a battering ram to breach the walls, he sent orders to a military engineer in Athens to ship the larger of 2 masts he had seen in the shipyard. The engineer, an expert who had spent his life designing fortifications and war machines, knew immediately that the consul was mistaken. A smaller mast would be lighter, easier to transport, and ultimately more effective for the specific machine he was constructing. He argued with the soldiers who delivered the message, drawing diagrams and explaining the physics of the situation, insisting that his expertise should override the consul's command. Finally, the soldiers warned him that Mucianus was not a man to be trifled with, but the engineer, convinced of his intellectual superiority, sent the smaller mast anyway, believing the consul would thank him once he saw its efficiency. When the shipment arrived, Mucianus did not marvel at the engineer's wisdom. Instead, he flew into a rage. He saw only insubordination. The siege preparations were halted while the consul summoned the engineer to explain himself. Arriving with confidence, the engineer once again launched into a technical explanation detailing why the smaller mast was the better choice. He believed that reason would prevail. Mucianus let him finish his lecture, then had him stripped naked and flogged to death. The engineer was right in his calculations, but he was dead wrong in his understanding of power. He failed to see that by arguing, he was challenging the consul's authority and intelligence. Had he simply obeyed or found a way to demonstrate his point without words, he would have saved his life. Contrast this tragedy with the cunning of Michelangelo in Renaissance Florence. In 1502, the artist was commissioned to carve a statue from a massive, ruined block of marble. He worked in secret, creating the masterpiece that would become David. When the work was nearly finished, Piero Soderini, the head of the Florentine Republic and the man paying for the statue, came to inspect it. Soderini, wishing to appear a man of taste and discernment, gazed at the giant figure and proclaimed that the nose was too thick. Michelangelo knew the nose was perfect. He also knew that Soderini was standing directly under the statue, a vantage point that distorted his perspective. Rather than arguing with his patron and risking offense, Michelangelo gestured for Soderini to follow him up the scaffolding. Concealing a handful of marble dust in his palm, the artist began to tap lightly on the nose with his chisel, letting the dust sprinkle down little by little. He actually changed nothing, but the visual trick was convincing. After a few minutes of this charade, he stepped back and asked Soderini to look again. "I like it better," the patron replied. "You've made it come alive." Michelangelo saved his statue and kept his patron happy by engaging in a harmless action rather than a dangerous argument. He validated Soderini's ego while preserving his own artistic integrity. The problem with words is that they are never neutral. They are colored by the mood and insecurities of the listener. In the heat of debate, people will say anything to support their position, quoting facts and scriptures that may or may not be true. Consequently, we have learned to distrust the silver tongue. Action, however, is visceral. It bypasses the defensive mechanisms of the mind and speaks directly to the senses. When Nikita Khrushchev was heckled during a speech denouncing the crimes of Stalin, he did not argue with the anonymous shouter who asked, "Where were you when Stalin was doing these things?" Instead, he stared fiercely into the crowd and shouted, "Who said that?" When no hand went up and the room fell into a terrified silence, Khrushchev spoke quietly. "Now you know where I was." He did not explain his fear, he demonstrated it, making the audience feel the paralyzing terror of the Stalinist era. There are times, however, when verbal argument serves a strategic purpose, as a distraction. When caught in a deception, a heated debate can draw attention away from your true maneuvering. The con artist Count Victor Lustig once used this tactic when a sheriff cornered him with a gun, demanding retribution for a scam. Lustig did not cower. He argued indignantly, flooding the sheriff with technical nonsense about the machine he had sold him, acting offended that the sheriff had operated it incorrectly. The sheer volume and conviction of his words confused the sheriff, lowered the gun, and allowed Lustig to not only escape, but to swindle the man a second time. Unless you are using words as a smokescreen to cover your tracks, however, preserve your energy. Do not waste your breath trying to convince those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Demonstrate your truth, and let the evidence speak for itself. Chapter 10. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. You can die from someone else's misery. Emotional states are as infectious as diseases. You may feel you are helping the drowning man, but you are only precipitating your own disaster. The unfortunate sometimes draw misfortune on themselves. They will also draw it on you. Associate with the happy and fortunate instead. Born in Limerick, Ireland in 1818, Mary Gilbert came to Paris in the 1840s to make her fortune as a dancer and performer. Taking the name Lola Montez, she claimed to be a flamenco dancer from Spain. By 1845, her career was languishing, and to survive, she became a courtesan, quickly one of the more successful in Paris. Only one man could salvage Lola's dancing career: Alexandre Dujarier, owner of the newspaper with the largest circulation in France, and also the newspaper's drama critic. She decided to woo and conquer him. Investigating his habits, she discovered that he went riding every morning. An excellent horsewoman herself, she rode out one morning and accidentally ran into him. Soon they were riding together every day. A few weeks later, Lola moved into his apartment. For a while, the two were happy together. With Dujarrier's help, Lola began to revive her dancing career. Despite the risk to his social standing, Dujarier told friends he would marry her in the spring. Although Dujarier was deeply in love, his life started to slide downhill. His fortunes in business changed, and influential friends began to avoid him. One night, Dujarier was invited to a party attended by some of the wealthiest young men in Paris. Lola wanted to go too, but he would not allow it. They had their first quarrel, and Dujarier attended the party by himself. There, hopelessly drunk, he insulted an influential drama critic, Jean-Baptiste Rosemont de Beauvalon. The following morning, Beauvalon challenged him to a duel. Beauvalon was one of the best pistol shots in France. Dujarier tried to apologize, but the duel took place, and he was shot and killed. Thus ended the life of one of the most promising young men of Paris society. Devastated, Lola left Paris. In 1846, Lola Montez found herself in Munich, where she decided to woo and conquer King Ludwig of Bavaria. The best way to Ludwig, she discovered, was through his aide-de-camp, Count Otto von Rechberg. One day when the Count was breakfasting at an outdoor cafe, Lola rode by on her horse, was accidentally thrown from the saddle and landed at Rechberg's feet. The Count rushed to help her and was enchanted. He promised to introduce her to Ludwig. Rechberg arranged an audience with the king for Lola, but when she arrived in the anteroom, she could hear the king saying he was too busy to meet a favor-seeking stranger. Lola pushed aside the sentries and entered his room anyway. In the process, the front of her dress somehow got torn, and to the astonishment of all, her bare breasts were brazenly exposed. Lola was granted her audience with Ludwig. 55 hours later, she made her debut on the Bavarian stage. The reviews were terrible, but that did not stop Ludwig from arranging more performances. Ludwig was, in his own words, bewitched by Lola. He started to appear in public with her on his arm, and then he bought and furnished an apartment for her on one of Munich's most fashionable boulevards. Although he had been known as a miser, he started to shower Lola with gifts and to write poetry for her. Now his favored mistress, she catapulted to fame and fortune overnight. Lola began to lose her sense of proportion. One day when she was out riding, an elderly man rode ahead of her, a bit too slowly for her liking. Unable to pass him, she began to slash him with her riding crop. On another occasion, she took her dog, unleashed, out for a stroll. The dog attacked a passerby, but instead of helping the man get the dog away, she whipped him with the leash. Incidents like this infuriated the stolid citizens of Bavaria, but Ludwig stood by Lola and even had her naturalized as a Bavarian citizen. The king's entourage tried to wake him to the dangers of the affair, but those who criticized Lola were summarily fired. While Bavarians who had loved their king now outwardly disrespected him, Lola was made a countess, had a new palace built for herself, and began to dabble in politics, advising Ludwig on policy. She was the most powerful force in the kingdom. Her influence in the king's cabinet continued to grow, and she treated the other ministers with disdain. As a result, riots broke out throughout the realm. A once peaceful land was virtually in the grip of civil war, and students everywhere were chanting, "Raus mit Lola!" By February of 1848, Ludwig was finally unable to withstand the pressure. With great sadness, he ordered Lola to leave Bavaria immediately. She left, but not until she was paid off. For the next 5 weeks, the Bavarians' wrath was turned against their formerly beloved king. In March of that year, he was forced to abdicate. Lola Montez moved to England. More than anything, she needed respectability, and she set her sights on George Trafford Heald, a promising young army officer who was the son of an influential barrister. Although he was 10 years younger than Lola, Heald fell under her spell. They were married in 1849. Soon arrested on the charge of bigamy, she skipped bail, and she and Heald made their way to Spain. They quarreled horribly, and on one occasion, Lola slashed him with a knife. Finally, she drove him away. Returning to England, he found he had lost his position in the army. Ostracized from English society, he moved to Portugal, where he lived in poverty. After a few months, his short life ended in a boating accident. In 1853, Lola moved to California, where she met and married a man named Pat Hull. Their relationship was as stormy as all the others, and she left Hull for another man. He took to drink and fell into a deep depression that lasted until he died 4 years later. At the age of 41, Lola gave away her clothes and finery and turned to God. She died 2 years later in 1861. Lola Montez attracted men with her wiles, but her power over them went beyond the sexual. It was through the force of her character that she kept her lovers enthralled. Men were sucked into the maelstrom she churned up around her. They felt confused, upset, but the strength of the emotions she stirred also made them feel more alive. As is often the case with infection, the problems would only arise over time. Lola's inherent instability would begin to get under her lover's skin. They would find themselves drawn into her problems, but their emotional attachment to her would make them want to help her. This was the crucial point of the disease, for Lola Montez could not be helped. Her problems were too deep. Once the lover identified with them, he was lost. He would find himself embroiled in quarrels. The infection would spread to his family and friends, or, in the case of Ludwig, to an entire nation. The only solution would be to cut her off, or suffer an eventual collapse. The infecting character type is not restricted to women. It has nothing to do with gender. It stems from an inward instability that radiates outward, drawing disaster upon itself. There is almost a desire to destroy and unsettle. You could spend a lifetime studying the pathology of infecting characters, but don't waste your time. Just learn the lesson. When you suspect you are in the presence of an infector, don't argue, don't try to help, don't pass the person on to your friends, or you will become enmeshed. Flee the infector's presence or suffer the consequences. Those misfortunates among us who have been brought down by circumstances beyond their control deserve all the help and sympathy we can give them. But there are others who are not born to misfortune or unhappiness, but who draw it upon themselves by their destructive actions and unsettling effect on others. It would be a great thing if we could raise them up, change their patterns, but more often than not, it is their patterns that end up getting inside and changing us. The reason is simple. Humans are extremely susceptible to the moods, emotions, and even the ways of thinking of those with whom they spend their time. The incurably unhappy and unstable have a particularly strong infecting power because their characters and emotions are so intense. They often present themselves as victims, making it difficult at first to see their miseries as self-inflicted. Before you realize the real nature of their problems, you have been infected by them. Understand this. In the game of power, the people you associate with are critical. The risk of associating with infectors is that you will waste valuable time and energy trying to free yourself. Through a kind of guilt by association, you will also suffer in the eyes of others. Never underestimate the dangers of infection. There is only one solution to infection: quarantine. But by the time you recognize the problem, it is often too late. A Lola Montez overwhelms you with her forceful personality. How can you protect yourself against such insidious viruses? The answer lies in judging people on the effects they have on the world and not on the reasons they give for their problems. Infectors can be recognized by the misfortune they draw on themselves, their turbulent past, their long line of broken relationships, their unstable careers, and the very force of their character, which sweeps you up and makes you lose your reason. Be forewarned by these signs of an infector. Learn to see the discontent in their eye. Most important of all, do not take pity. Do not enmesh yourself in trying to help. The infector will remain unchanged, but you will be unhinged. The other side of infection is equally valid and perhaps more readily understood. There are people who attract happiness to themselves by their good cheer, natural buoyancy, and intelligence. They are a source of pleasure, and you must associate with them to share in the prosperity they draw upon themselves. This applies to more than good cheer and success. All positive qualities can infect us. Use the positive side of this emotional osmosis to advantage. If, for example, you are miserly by nature, you will never go beyond a certain limit. Only generous souls attain greatness. Associate with the generous then, and they will infect you, opening up everything that is tight and restricted in you. If you are gloomy, gravitate to the cheerful. If you are prone to isolation, force yourself to befriend the gregarious. Never associate with those who share your defects. They will reinforce everything that holds you back. Only create associations with positive affinities. Make this a rule of life, and you will benefit more than from all the therapy in the world. Chapter 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you. In the Middle Ages, the city of Siena was saved from a foreign aggressor by a brave mercenary soldier. The citizens were overcome with gratitude but soon faced a dilemma. No amount of money or honor seemed sufficient to repay the man who had preserved their liberty. They considered making him the lord of the city, but even that felt inadequate. Finally, a citizen stood before the assembly and proposed a grim solution. He suggested that they kill the mercenary and then worship him as their patron saint. The assembly agreed, and the savior of Siena was put to death. A similar fate befell the Count of Carmagnola, one of the most successful mercenary captains of Renaissance Italy. In 1432, while in the service of Venice, he was recalled to the city under the guise of receiving great honors. A favorite of the people, he expected a hero's welcome. Instead, he was led away from the Doge's palace, convicted on false charges, and beheaded before a horrified crowd. The problem for these men was not that they had failed, but that they were replaceable. There were many other soldiers just as capable, and their employers realized that killing them was cheaper and safer than maintaining their rising power. They had taken their positions for granted without ensuring they were truly indispensable. Contrast this with the career of Otto von Bismarck. When he entered the Prussian parliament in 1847, he did not ally himself with the strong or the popular. Instead, he cast his lot with the king, Frederick William IV, a weak and indecisive man whose power was at a low point. Bismarck courted the king tirelessly, defending him when others attacked his ineptitude. Eventually, he was made a minister, and he began to provide the spine the king lacked, pushing him into firm actions that restored the monarchy's power. When Frederick died and his brother William took the throne, the new king initially disliked Bismarck and wanted him gone. But William faced the same sea of enemies and felt overwhelmed. Bismarck once again stepped in, providing the strength and decisive leadership the king could not muster on his own. William grew so dependent on his minister that he could not rule without him. Bismarck became the true power behind the throne, manipulating the emperor and directing the destiny of Germany because he had made himself the only man who could hold the empire together. The ultimate power is the ability to get people to do as you wish without having to force them. When you create a relationship of dependency, you hold the upper hand. The master may be weak, or simply unable to function in a specific area without your expertise. By enmeshing yourself in their work, you ensure that removing you would cause chaos or collapse. This gives you a freedom that the completely independent man, isolated in his cabin, can never possess. Interdependence is the law of the world. Total independence is a road to obscurity. King Louis XI of France, known as the Spider King, once learned this lesson through a confrontation with his court astrologer. The astrologer had accurately predicted the death of a court lady, which terrified the king. Thinking the man's powers were a threat, Louis decided to have him killed. He summoned the astrologer to his room, instructing his guards to throw the man out the window upon a signal. Before giving the signal, however, Louis asked the astrologer to predict his own fate and the length of his life. The astrologer, sensing the trap, replied that he would die exactly 3 days before His Majesty. The king, terrified of sealing his own doom, never gave the signal. Instead, he protected the astrologer with the best doctors and lavish gifts for the rest of his life. The astrologer had brilliantly tied his own survival to the king's greatest insecurity. There are many ways to make yourself indispensable. Foremost is to possess a talent or skill that cannot be easily replaced. During the Renaissance, Michelangelo was often arrogant and difficult, yet his patron, Pope Julius II, tolerated him because there was simply no other artist who could match his genius. You do not need the talent of a Michelangelo, but you must cultivate a skill that sets you apart. If you are one of many who can do the job, you are instantly disposable. You must create a situation where your master cannot easily find another to fill your shoes. Consider the case of Harry Cohn, the president of Columbia Pictures during the anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s. His executives demanded he fire a screenwriter named John Howard Lawson, who had been singled out as a communist. Cohn was a staunch conservative who hated communists, yet he refused to fire Lawson. He kept him not out of political sympathy, but because Lawson was the writer for Humphrey Bogart, the studio's biggest star. To lose Lawson meant risking the loss of Bogart, a chain of dependence that Cohn valued more than his political image. While some seek power through secret intelligence, knowing the dirty secrets of those above them, this is a dangerous path that breeds paranoia and instability. It is far better to be relied upon for a unique ability or a web of alliances that makes you a pillar of the structure. Henry Kissinger survived the turbulence of the Nixon White House not because he was loved, but because he was involved in so many aspects of the administration's policy that firing him would have been disastrous. Do not mistake this dependency for love. It is often better to be feared for the consequences of your absence than to be loved for your company. Fear is controllable, love is fickle. If your position relies solely on friendship, you are on shaky ground. But if your masters know that your departure means their downfall, they will treat you with the utmost respect. Independence is a mirage. The wise courtier seeks mutual dependence, making himself the invisible foundation upon which the master's house is built. Chapter 12. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. The essence of deception is distraction. To successfully mislead your target, you must divert their attention from your true purpose, creating a screen of smoke that allows you to maneuver unseen. Of all the tools available for this task, few are as potent or as disarming as a calculated act of honesty or generosity. A single sincere gesture can blind a victim to a dozen dishonest ones. By learning to give before you take, you can turn even the most suspicious tyrants into trusting children, eager to place their fate in your hands. In 1926, the sophisticated con artist Count Victor Lustig approached the most dangerous man in America, Al Capone. Lustig, a man of refined European manners, walked into the gangster's Chicago headquarters with a bold proposition. If Capone would entrust him with $50,000, Lustig promised to double it within 2 months. Capone, a man who lived by the gun and trusted no one, was skeptical. Yet something about the Count's audacity and aristocratic bearing intrigued him. He handed over the cash, warning Lustig that he expected results. Lustig took the money, placed it in a safety deposit box, and did absolutely nothing with it. He made no investments and ran no schemes. 2 months later, Lustig returned to Capone. He looked defeated and humbled. He apologized profusely to the gangster, explaining that his plan had failed miserably and that he had lost the opportunity to generate the promised profit. Capone, accustomed to betrayal and excuses, stiffened, likely preparing to order his men to dispose of the failure. But then Lustig reached into his coat and withdrew the original $50,000, placing the stack of bills on the desk. He explained that although he had failed to make a profit, he had at least preserved the principal. He returned every penny. Capone was thunderstruck. He lived in a world of wolves, where theft and deception were the air men breathed. He had expected Lustig to either run with the money or return with a lie. To have the money returned intact was a shock that completely short-circuited his defenses. In a moment of rare vulnerability, Capone told Lustig he was an honest man. To help him get back on his feet, the gangster grabbed $5,000 from the stack and gave it to the Count as a reward. Lustig accepted the gift, bowed, and left. This $5,000 had been his goal all along. By using a grand gesture of honesty involving a large sum, he bought the trust that allowed him to walk away with a smaller yet substantial profit without any risk. This law operates on a fundamental psychological truth. We are instinctively grateful for acts of kindness and honesty. They lower our defenses and warm our hearts. When someone gives us a gift, we tend to view them as a friend rather than a manipulator. This is why the Trojan horse remains the ultimate metaphor for this strategy. During the siege of Troy, the Greeks spent 10 years trying to breach the city's walls with force, achieving nothing but bloodshed. It was only when they engaged in a ruse, leaving a giant wooden horse as a supposed offering to the gods, that they succeeded. The Trojans, believing the war was over and the horse was a gift, dragged the structure inside their gates. In doing so, they invited their own destruction. One gift achieved what a decade of violence could not. The power of selective honesty is not limited to financial scams or warfare. It is a master key for political survival. In ancient China, Duke Wu of Cheng sought to conquer the powerful kingdom of Hu. To dull his enemies' suspicions, he engaged in a series of generous distractions. He married his own daughter to the ruler of Hu, creating a familial bond. Later, when one of his own ministers advised him to invade Hu, the Duke feigned outrage. He executed the minister for daring to suggest war against a brother state. When the ruler of Hu heard of this execution, he was convinced of Wu's loyalty and relaxed his border defenses. With the enemy pacified by these displays of integrity and kinship, Duke Wu marched his army into Hu and conquered the kingdom with ease. Even the hardest hearts can be melted by a display of unexpected nobility. The Roman general Camillus, while besieging the city of Falisci, was approached by a local schoolteacher. The teacher had tricked the children of the city's leading citizens into walking outside the walls, where he offered them to Camillus as hostages, hoping to secure a reward for himself. Camillus, however, understood the strategic value of moral superiority. He refused the hostages. Instead, he had the treacherous teacher stripped and bound, and gave the children rods to whip him back into the city. When the citizens of Falisci saw this act of honor, their will to resist evaporated. They surrendered not to Rome's battering rams, but to the general's reputation for justice. Camillus knew that a calculated act of nobility could dismantle an enemy's resistance more effectively than a long and costly siege. To practice this law effectively, you must understand the emotional needs of your target. A man like Al Capone, surrounded by sycophants and killers, starves for a touch of genuine humanity. By providing a simulation of honesty, Lustig filled that void and blinded the gangster to reality. However, this tactic requires a history of ambiguity or a fresh introduction. If you already have a reputation for deceit, a sudden honest act will be viewed with suspicion. But if you can build a first impression of integrity, or create a momentary shock of generosity, you create a window of opportunity. Once the victim's guard is down, once they have accepted the gift or the honest gesture, they are yours to manipulate. Chapter 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude. If you find yourself in a position of weakness and need to turn to an ally for help, do not make the mistake of reminding him of your past assistance or his moral obligations. He will find a way to ignore you, for gratitude is a heavy burden that most men wish to discard. Instead, uncover something in your request or in your proposed alliance that will benefit him. Emphasize this advantage out of all proportion. When he sees that there is something to be gained for himself, he will respond with enthusiasm. In the early 14th century, a soldier of fortune named Castruccio Castracani rose from the rank of a common private to become the lord of the great Italian city of Lucca. His ascent was brutal and bloody, fueled by treachery and ambition. One of the most powerful families in Lucca, the Poggios, had been instrumental in his climb to power. However, once Castruccio established himself as ruler, he began to forget his old friends. The Poggios, feeling slighted and ignored, grew resentful. They watched as the man they had supported grew arrogant and tyrannical. In 1325, while Castruccio was away fighting Lucca's main rival, Florence, the Poggios saw their chance. They conspired with other noble families to rid themselves of this ungrateful prince. They launched an insurrection, attacking the governor Castruccio had left behind and inciting riots in the streets. The city was on the brink of chaos, and the rebels were poised to seize control. At the height of the tension, however, Stefano di Poggio, the oldest and most respected member of the family, intervened. A man of peace who had not joined the conspiracy, he urged his relatives to lay down their arms. He argued that Castruccio would be grateful for their restraint and would surely listen to reason. Trusting in the old man's wisdom and their history of friendship with the prince, the rebels agreed to a truce. When Castruccio returned to Lucca, he was furious to find his city in turmoil. But Stefano di Poggio came to him immediately, acting as a mediator. He did not speak of power or demands. Instead, he appealed to Castruccio's sense of mercy and gratitude. He reminded the prince of the Poggios' past support, how they had helped him when he was nothing. He begged Castruccio to pardon his family for their momentary lapse in loyalty, citing their voluntary surrender as proof of their good intentions. Castruccio listened intently, thanked Stefano for his wise intervention, and promised that justice would be tempered with kindness. He invited the entire Poggio family to the palace to celebrate their reconciliation. Trusting his word, the Poggios arrived at the palace, unarmed and relieved, but as soon as they were inside, Castruccio ordered his guards to seize them. He had Stefano and the entire family executed, including the rebels who had laid down their arms. Castruccio knew that a forgiven enemy is often more dangerous than an open one, and he had no interest in honoring past debts. Stefano's fatal mistake was appealing to the prince's gratitude and mercy, qualities that a ruthless man like Castruccio viewed as weaknesses. Had Stefano approached him with a proposition of future political utility or a leverage that threatened Castruccio's power, he might have saved his family. Instead, he relied on the past, and it cost him everything. Contrast this tragedy with the diplomatic masterstroke of the island of Corcyra in 433 BC. Corcyra was on the brink of war with the powerful Greek city-state of Corinth. The Corcyrians knew they could not stand alone. they needed the help of Athens, the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean. Both Corcyra and Corinth sent ambassadors to Athens to plead their case before the assembly. The stakes were high, as an alliance with either side would likely precipitate a major war. The representative from Corinth spoke first. He delivered a passionate and eloquent speech filled with moral righteousness. He reminded the Athenians of the many times Corinth had stood by them in the past. He spoke of old debts, of loyalty, and of the sacred bonds of gratitude. He argued that Athens had a moral obligation to support their longtime friend against the upstart Corcyrians. His speech was moving, appealing to the Athenians' sense of honor and history. Then the Corcyrian representative took the floor. He admitted bluntly that Corcyra had no history of friendship with Athens. In fact, they had often been rivals. He owed them nothing, and they owed him nothing. Instead of looking backward, he looked forward. He pointed out that a war between Athens and Sparta was inevitable. He reminded the Athenians that Corcyra possessed the second largest navy in Greece. If Athens allied with them, the combined fleets would be virtually unbeatable. If they refused and Corcyra was conquered by Corinth, that naval power would be turned against Athens. He offered no sentiment, only a cold calculation of military self-interest. When the votes were cast, the Athenians overwhelmingly chose the alliance with Corcyra. They were not swayed by Corinth's guilt-tripping about the past. They were motivated by the fear of losing naval supremacy and the greed for greater power. The Corcyrians understood that in the arena of politics, a tangible benefit is worth more than 1,000 past favors. This law strikes at a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. We often believe that reminding people of what we have done for them will stir their conscience. In reality, it often stirs their resentment. No one likes to be reminded of a debt. It implies inferiority and dependence. Gratitude is a heavy weight, and most people will go to great lengths to throw it off, even if it means betraying a benefactor. Self-interest, however, is a language everyone speaks fluently. When you show a man how helping you will advance his own cause, fill his coffers, or destroy his enemies, his eyes will light up. He will not only help you, he will do so with vigor, for he is ultimately helping himself. To master this law, you must train yourself to see the world through the eyes of the person you are petitioning. Forget your own needs and your own ego. Do not whine about what you are owed. Instead, look for the lever that moves them. Is it money, status, power, fear? Once you identify their currency, frame your request in those terms. If you can make your survival synonymous with their success, you will never stand alone. But if you rely on the decaying corpse of past generosity, do not be surprised when you are left to rot. Chapter 14. Pose as a friend, work as a spy. Knowing about your rival is critical. Use spies to gather valuable information that will keep you a step ahead. Better still, play the spy yourself. In polite social encounters, learn to probe. Ask indirect questions to get people to reveal their weaknesses and intentions. There is no occasion that is not an opportunity for artful spying. Joseph Duveen was the most successful art dealer of the early 20th century, a man who dominated the market by understanding the psychology of the ultra-wealthy. His greatest challenge, however, was the industrialist Andrew Mellon. Mellon was a cold, taciturn man who had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with Duveen, whose reputation for talkativeness and charm rubbed him the wrong way. Duveen, however, was undeterred. He told his friends that Mellon would not only buy from him, but would eventually buy only from him. Duveen began a secret campaign of espionage. He bribed Mellon's staff, putting his valet and other servants on his own payroll. For years, he gathered scraps of information about Mellon's habits, his tastes, his daily routine, and his travel plans. He built a dossier on the man that was more complete than what even Mellon's own family knew. He waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. In 1921, he learned that Mellon was in London and staying at Claridge's Hotel. Duveen booked a suite on the floor below him. He then arranged for his own valet to befriend Mellon's valet. One day, Duveen received the tip he had been waiting for. Mellon was dressing to go out to the National Gallery. Duveen timed his exit perfectly, entering the elevator just as Mellon did. He introduced himself casually, and when Mellon mentioned his destination, Duveen exclaimed that he was heading to the very same place. They shared a cab, and at the gallery, Duveen dazzled the industrialist. He didn't try to sell him anything. Instead, he spoke with genuine insight about the paintings Mellon admired. Mellon was disarmed. He found Duveen to be charming, knowledgeable, and surprisingly in tune with his own aesthetic sensibilities. He had no idea that this chance meeting and their shared tastes were the result of years of paid spying. From that day on, Mellon became Duveen's most loyal client, making the dealer a fortune. The lesson here is that you cannot fly blind in the game of power. Information is the key that unlocks the door to your rival's fortress. By knowing their habits, their likes, and their hidden desires, you can tailor your approach so that it seems natural and inevitable. Spying allows you to predict behavior and control the outcome of interactions before they even begin. While using others as spies is effective, the ultimate master of this law plays the spy himself. The French statesman Talleyrand was without peer in this art. In social gatherings, he was known as a brilliant conversationalist, yet if one paid close attention, they would notice that he rarely said anything of substance about his own views. His genius lay in getting others to talk. He would suppress his own personality to create a vacuum that others felt compelled to fill. He would feign naivete or drop a calculatedly wrong opinion, prompting others to correct him and, in the process, reveal their true thoughts. During the Congress of Vienna, Talleyrand needed to know the secret intentions of the other European powers. He would organize delightful parties and games of charades. In this relaxed atmosphere, diplomats would let their guard down. Talleyrand would listen, watch, and probe with subtle questions. He once remarked that he would fire a pistol in the air to see who jumped out the window. By creating a sudden emotional reaction, a rumor of a treaty, a feigned piece of bad news, he could read the panic or excitement in his rivals' eyes, revealing their hidden agendas more accurately than any stolen document. To practice this law, you must learn to wear the mask of a friend. People love to talk about themselves, and they are naturally trusting in social situations. If you appear friendly and interested, they will open up. Use the false confession tactic. Admit a minor weakness or secret of your own. This creates a sense of intimacy and obligates the other person to reciprocate with a secret of their own, one that is likely far more valuable. Contradict them gently to stir their emotions. In their heat to defend themselves, they will blurt out truths they meant to conceal. But be warned, this is a delicate game. If people suspect you are pumping them for information, they will shut down and you will make enemies. Your probing must be disguised as friendly chatter. You must be an actor, concealing your sharp eyes and keen ears behind a facade of warmth and openness. By posing as a friend, you disarm your victims, gathering the intelligence that will allow you to destroy them or bend them to your will. Chapter 15. Crush your enemy. Totally. All great leaders since Moses have known that a feared enemy must be crushed completely. If one ember is left alight, no matter how dimly it smolders, a fire will eventually break out. More is lost through stopping halfway than through total annihilation. The enemy will recover and will seek revenge. Crush him not only in body but in spirit. In China, during the 3rd century BC, a fierce rivalry emerged between two leaders, Xiang Yu and Liu Pang. They had begun as friends and allies, fighting together against the powerful Qin kingdom. Xiang Yu was a nobleman, a giant of a man, violent and impetuous, a brilliant warrior who led from the front. Liu Pang was of peasant stock, a man who preferred wine and women to battle, but who possessed a cunning intellect and an ability to listen to his advisors. As their common enemy crumbled, their rivalry intensified. Xiang Yu, ever the dominant force, had numerous opportunities to kill Liu Pang. His advisor, Fan Tseng, repeatedly urged him to do so, warning that Liu Pang was a sleeping dragon, a man whose ambition was masked by his dissolute lifestyle. At a famous banquet, the Hong Gate banquet, Fan Tseng arranged for a sword dance designed to end in Liu Pang's assassination. But Xiang Yu hesitated. He felt a lingering affection for his old comrade, a sense of honor that prevented him from striking down a man he considered his inferior. Liu Pang, sensing the danger, escaped. This moment of hesitation sealed Xiang Yu's fate. Liu Pang did not share his rival's scruples. He knew that in the struggle for supreme power, there is no room for mercy. He used Xiang Yu's mercy against him, regrouping his forces and turning the tables. In the final battle, Liu Pang surrounded Xiang Yu's army. He ordered his men to sing the folk songs of Xiang Yu's native land, Chu. Hearing the songs of his home from the enemy camp, Xiang Yu's spirit broke. He believed his homeland had already fallen. His army deserted him, and he was left with a handful of loyal followers. Cornered and alone, the great warrior slit his own throat. Liu Pang went on to found the Han dynasty, which ruled China for 4 centuries. He understood what Xiang Yu did not. An enemy spared is a viper nursed at the breast. The history of power is littered with the corpses of those who stopped halfway. The idea of mercy is a comforting fiction in civilized society, but in the raw contest for power, it is a fatal weakness. Your enemy wishes you ill, he wants to destroy you. If you defeat him but leave him alive, he will nurse a grudge that will grow into a consuming hatred. He will wait in the shadows, gathering his strength, learning from his defeat, until he is ready to strike again, and when he does, he will show no mercy. Empress Wu Zetian of China, the only woman to rule the country in her own name, understood this law perfectly. Rising from the position of a lowly concubine, she ruthlessly eliminated every rival who stood in her path. She did not just exile them, she had them killed, often in gruesome ways, to ensure they could never return. When she finally ascended the throne, she unleashed a reign of terror against the old aristocracy, wiping out entire families to prevent any future vendettas. By crushing her enemies totally, she secured a reign of unprecedented stability and prosperity. This law applies not just to warfare, but to negotiation and daily life. If you have a rival who is determined to bring you down, do not try to negotiate or compromise. Do not hope that your generosity will win them over. They will interpret your mercy as weakness, and their hatred will only intensify. You must destroy their ability to harm you. This does not always mean physical destruction, but it means destroying their reputation, their support base, their spirit. You must make it impossible for them to ever challenge you again. Consider the example of the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. In his secret speech of 1956, he denounced the crimes of his predecessor Joseph Stalin, but he did not go far enough. He left many of Stalin's old henchmen in positions of power, hoping to bridge the gap between the old guard and the new. These men, whom he had spared, eventually plotted against him and engineered his downfall in 1964. Khrushchev paid the price for stopping halfway. Ultimately, the goal is not just to win the battle, but to secure the peace. A crushed enemy can no longer threaten you. Their spirit is broken, their resources gone. They serve as a warning to others who might consider opposing you. By annihilating the threat completely, you free yourself from the anxiety of a future attack, allowing you to focus your energy on building and expanding your power. Be like the viper. Strike once, and make sure the venom does its work. Chapter 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. Too much circulation makes the price go down. The more you are seen and heard from, the more common you appear. If you are already established in a group, temporary withdrawal from it will make you more talked about, even more admired. You must learn when to leave. Create value through scarcity. In the 8th century BC, a man named Deioces lived in Media, a land, in modern-day Iran, that had fallen into chaos. The Medes were divided into tribes and had no central government. Crime was rampant and justice was non-existent. Deioces, a man of great ambition, saw an opportunity. He lived in a small village and had established a reputation for settling disputes fairly. Soon, people from other villages began to flock to him to arbitrate their conflicts. His fame grew until he was the sole judge in the land. Suddenly, at the height of his power, Deioces announced he was retiring. He could no longer neglect his own affairs to solve the problems of others. The result was predictable. Chaos returned, but this time it was worse, for the people had tasted order. The tribes met and decided they needed a king, and the only man for the job was Deioces. He accepted, but on his own terms. He demanded a massive palace be built for him, surrounded by 7 concentric walls. He then withdrew into the center of this fortress. No one was allowed to see him. All communication had to be done through messengers. He established a ritual of invisibility. For 53 years, Deioces ruled Media from behind his walls. The people, who had once treated him as a common equal, now revered him as a god. Because they could not see him, they imagined him to be more than human. His absence created a sense of awe and fear that held the kingdom together. By removing himself, he increased his presence in the minds of his subjects. This law operates on a simple economic principle. Scarcity creates value. If you are always available, always visible, you become common. People take you for granted, but if you withdraw, you create a vacuum that others will rush to fill with their desire and their imagination. Consider the love affair between the French novelist Sir Guillaume de Ballan and his mistress, Madame Guilhelme de Javiac. They were perfectly happy, but Sir Guillaume began to worry that their happiness had become too stable, too predictable. He feared that without the tension of uncertainty, her love for him would fade. So he decided to create a false absence. He suddenly stopped visiting her, refused to answer her letters, and even let rumors spread that he had found another lover. His plan worked too well. Madame Guilhelme was at first confused, then hurt, and finally furious. When Sir Guillaume finally returned, expecting a joyous reconciliation, she drove him away. It took months of desperate pleading and difficult trials before she would take him back. He had learned the dangerous side of this law. Absence diminishes minor passions and inflames great ones, as the wind extinguishes a candle and fans a fire. The lesson is clear. You must first establish a strong presence. If you leave before you are missed, you will simply be forgotten. You must be the sun that everyone depends on for warmth. Only then will your eclipse cause panic. But once you have established your worth, you must learn to withdraw. Do not wait until people are tired of you. Leave while you are still wanted, and your return will be greeted with relief and renewed appreciation. This law applies to nations as well as individuals. In the 15th century, the Assyrian Empire suddenly collapsed and vanished from history. Its capital, Nineveh, was abandoned. 2 centuries later, the Greek historian Xenophon marched his army past the ruins and did not even recognize them as the remains of the mighty Assyrians. The empire had been too present, too brutal, and too omnipresent in the lives of its subjects. When it fell, everyone was glad to see it go, and its memory was quickly erased. Contrast this with the legacy of civilizations that understood the power of mystery and absence. The great kings of the Orient rarely appeared in public. Their power was felt, not seen. By withholding themselves, they became larger than life. In the modern world, where overexposure is the norm, the power of absence is more potent than ever. We are inundated with images of our leaders and celebrities until we are sick of them. The person who knows how to withdraw, to maintain a degree of privacy and mystery, instantly stands out. They become a screen onto which we project our fantasies. Use absence to refresh your image. If you are a leader, do not be seen in every meeting. If you are a lover, do not be always available. Make yourself scarce, and you will become precious. Chapter 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. Humans are creatures of habit with an insatiable need to see familiarity in other people's actions. Your predictability gives them a sense of control. Turn the tables. Be deliberately unpredictable. Behavior that seems to have no consistency or purpose will keep them off balance, and they will wear themselves out trying to explain your moves. Taken to an extreme, this strategy can intimidate and terrorize. In May of 1972, the chess world turned its eyes to Reykjavik, Iceland, for the World Chess Championship between the Soviet champion Boris Spassky and the American challenger Bobby Fischer. The Soviets had dominated the game for decades, treating it as a demonstration of their intellectual superiority. Spassky was the reigning king, a man of calm and collected brilliance. Fischer, however, was known for his volatility. As the match approached, Fischer began a campaign of psychological warfare that would become legendary. Before even arriving, Fischer made impossible demands. He complained about the prize money, the lighting, the venue, and the cameras. He missed the opening ceremony, creating a suspense that rattled the Soviet team. When he finally arrived, he continued to complain. He inspected the chair provided for him and rejected it, demanding a specific replica of a chair he had used in New York. The organizers scrambled to meet his whims. In the first game, Fischer made a basic blunder and lost. He then blamed the cameras in the room for his poor play. For the second game, he simply refused to show up, forfeiting the match. The score was now 2-0 in favor of Spassky. The champion should have been confident, but instead he was deeply unsettled. Fischer's behavior was irrational, erratic, and impossible to predict. Was he crazy? Was he planning a master trap? Or was he simply leaving? Fischer returned for the third game, but demanded it be played in a small, private room at the back of the arena, away from the audience. Spassky, desperate to just play chess, agreed to this humiliation. In that small room, Fischer played brilliantly, crushing Spassky. The tide had turned. Fischer continued his antics, arriving late, complaining about noise, staring at Spassky during the games. The Soviet champion began to crumble. He felt he was playing against a madman who operated outside the laws of logic. Spassky became paranoid, suspecting that Fischer was using electronic devices or chemical substances to alter his mind. He eventually lost his composure and the championship. Fischer had not just outplayed him on the board, he had destroyed his mind by refusing to act like a rational human being. We are hardwired to analyze the people around us. We build mental models of their behavior so we can predict what they will do next. This gives us a feeling of safety. When someone acts in a way that shatters these models, when they are kind one day and cruel the next, or when they remain silent when we expect them to speak, we become anxious. We try to find a reason, a pattern, but the more we look, the more confused we become. In this state of suspended terror, our imagination runs wild, inventing dangers that may not even exist. Pablo Picasso used this dynamic in his dealings with art dealers. He would never let them know where they stood. Sometimes he would be warm and inviting, showing them his latest works. Other times he would refuse to see them, or he would show them a canvas only to abruptly withdraw it, claiming he had decided to keep it. He would promise a painting to one dealer, then sell it to another. This unpredictability drove them crazy, but it also made them desperate to please him. They lived in fear of his changing moods, and as a result, he controlled the relationship entirely. They accepted his terms, his prices, and his abuse, simply because they never knew what he would do next. In 1499, Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, decided to conquer the Romagna region of Italy. He hired a brutal mercenary named Ramiro de Orco to pacify the lawless region. Ramiro did his job well, executing criminals and establishing a terrifying order. But Cesare knew that such brutality would eventually breed hatred against him. He needed to separate himself from his own enforcer. One morning, the citizens of the town of Cesena woke up to a gruesome sight. Ramiro de Orco's body had been cut in two and placed in the public square, with a bloody knife and a block of wood beside it. The people were stunned. They were relieved that the cruel governor was dead, but they were also terrified by the swift and inexplicable violence of the act. Cesare had not put Ramiro on trial. He had not explained his actions. He simply displayed the corpse. The sheer unpredictability of the move, killing his own loyal servant without warning, created a satisfaction and stupefaction in the people. They realized that Cesare was a man who played by no rules but his own. This act of sudden, calculated violence secured his authority more effectively than any law or army could have. To cultivate an air of unpredictability, you do not need to be a madman or a murderer. You simply need to break your patterns. If you are always the one who calls first, stop calling. If you are known for being conservative in meetings, suddenly advocate for a radical idea. If you are usually mild-mannered, show a flash of controlled anger. By disrupting the routine, you force those around you to pay attention. They can no longer take you for granted or predict your next move. They must remain alert, watching you, waiting for the next surprise. In that state of anticipation, you hold the power. However, use this law with caution. Unpredictability is a tactic of the powerful. If you are in a subordinate position, erratic behavior may simply get you fired or ostracized. You must first establish a level of competence and stability so that your sudden shifts are seen as strategic or the prerogative of genius rather than the signs of incompetence. But once you have the leverage, do not let others get comfortable. Keep them guessing and you will keep them in check. Chapter 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. The world is dangerous and enemies are everywhere. Everyone has to protect themselves. A fortress seems the safest, but isolation exposes you to more dangers than it protects you from. It cuts you off from valuable information. It makes you conspicuous and an easy target. Better to circulate among people, find allies, mingle. You are shielded from your enemies by the crowd. Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, 221–210 BC, was the mightiest man of his day. His empire was vaster and more powerful than that of Alexander the Great. He had conquered all of the kingdoms surrounding his own kingdom of Qin and unified them into one massive realm called China. But in the last years of his life, few, if anyone, saw him. The emperor lived in the most magnificent palace built to that date, in the capital of Xianyang. The palace had 270 pavilions. All of these were connected by secret underground passageways, allowing the emperor to move through the palace without anyone seeing him. He slept in a different room every night, and anyone who inadvertently laid eyes on him was instantly beheaded. Only a handful of men knew his whereabouts, and if they revealed it to anyone, they too were put to death. The first emperor had grown so terrified of human contact that when he had to leave the palace, he traveled incognito, disguising himself carefully. On one such trip through the provinces, he suddenly died. His body was borne back to the capital in the emperor's carriage, with a cart packed with salted fish trailing behind it to cover up the smell of the rotting corpse. No one was to know of his death. He died alone, far from his wives, his family, his friends, and his courtiers, accompanied only by a minister and a handful of eunuchs. Shi Huangdi started off as the king of Qin, a fearless warrior of unbridled ambition. Writers of the time described him as a man with a waspish nose, eyes like slits, the voice of a jackal, and the heart of a tiger or wolf. He could be merciful sometimes, but more often he swallowed men up without a scruple. It was through trickery and violence that he conquered the provinces surrounding his own and created China, forging a single nation and culture out of many. He broke up the feudal system, and to keep an eye on the many members of the royal families that were scattered across the realm's various kingdoms, he moved 120,000 of them to the capital, where he housed the most important courtiers in the vast palace of Xianyang. He consolidated the many walls on the borders and built them into the Great Wall of China. He standardized the country's laws, its written language, even the size of its cartwheels. As part of this process of unification, however, the first emperor outlawed the writings and teachings of Confucius, the philosopher whose ideas on the moral life had already become virtually a religion in Chinese culture. On Shi Huangti's order, thousands of books relating to Confucius were burned, and anyone who quoted Confucius was to be beheaded. This made many enemies for the emperor, and he grew constantly afraid, even paranoid. The executions mounted. A contemporary, the writer Han Fei-tzu, noted that Qin has been victorious for 4 generations, yet has lived in constant terror and apprehension of destruction. As the emperor withdrew deeper and deeper into the palace to protect himself, he slowly lost control of the realm. Eunuchs and ministers enacted political policies without his approval or even his knowledge. They also plotted against him. By the end, he was emperor in name only, and was so isolated that barely anyone knew he had died. He had probably been poisoned by the same scheming ministers who encouraged his isolation. That is what isolation brings. Retreat into a fortress, and you lose contact with the sources of your power. You lose your ear for what is happening around you, as well as a sense of proportion. Instead of being safer, you cut yourself off from the kind of knowledge on which your life depends. Never enclose yourself so far from the streets that you cannot hear what is happening around you, including the plots against you. Louis XIV came to power at the end of a terrible civil war, the Fronde. A principal instigator of the war had been the nobility, which deeply resented the growing power of the throne and yearned for the days of feudalism, when the lords ruled their own fiefdoms and the king had little authority over them. The nobles had lost the civil war, but they remained a fractious, resentful lot. The construction of Versailles, then, was far more than the decadent whim of a luxury-loving king. It served a crucial function. The king could keep an eye and an ear on everyone and everything around him. The once proud nobility was reduced to squabbling over the right to help the king put on his robes in the morning. There was no possibility here of privacy, no possibility of isolation. Louis XIV very early grasped the truth that for a king to isolate himself is grave danger. In his absence, conspiracies will spawn. For the powerful, the danger of isolation is very real. You can be cut off from the world by your own status. Everyone wants to protect you from bad news, to flatter you, to agree with you. You live in a bubble. The only way to break this bubble is to make a conscious effort to mingle. Do not sit on your throne and wait for information to come to you. Go out and find it. Disguise yourself, if necessary, like the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who would walk the streets of Baghdad at night dressed as a commoner to hear what the people were really saying. Or be like Louis XIV, who made his court a glass house where nothing could be hidden. Because humans are social creatures, power depends on social interaction. To be powerful, you must place yourself at the center of things, like a spider in the middle of a web. The more people you know, the more information you have, and the more options you have. Isolation cuts you off from this flow. It makes you awkward and out of touch. It also makes you a target. It is easy to plot against someone you never see, someone who has become an abstraction. But it is hard to conspire against a man who is constantly in your face, who knows your secrets, and who can charm you with a smile. In times of danger, the instinct is to retreat, to build walls. Do not give in to this instinct. It will only make the danger worse. When you feel threatened, that is the time to reach out, to make new allies, to force yourself into the fray. Strength comes from numbers and from the fluidity of social contact. A fortress may seem safe, but it is actually a prison. It limits your movement and cuts off your escape routes. It makes you a sitting duck. The best fortress is the love and support of the people. If you are loved or at least respected, you will be warned of plots against you. You will have eyes and ears everywhere. But if you isolate yourself, you breed suspicion and resentment. People will assume the worst of you. They will believe the rumors that your enemies spread. And when the attack finally comes, you will find yourself alone, trapped in the very walls you built to protect yourself. Chapter 19. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. There are many different kinds of people in the world, and you can never assume that everyone will react to your strategies in the same way. Deceive or outmaneuver some people and they will spend the rest of their lives seeking revenge. They are wolves in lamb's clothing. Choose your victims and opponents carefully, then never offend or deceive the wrong person. In the early 13th century, Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, ruled a vast empire stretching from Turkey to Afghanistan. He was a powerful man with a massive army, confident in his superiority. In 1219, he received a peaceful embassy from Genghis Khan, the rising leader of the Mongols to the east. Khan, who respected the Shah's power, sought to reopen the Silk Road and proposed a trade agreement, offering to share the route and maintain peace between their two empires. Muhammad, however, saw Khan as a mere upstart. He felt insulted that a tribal leader would dare to address him as an equal. He arrogantly ignored the offer. Khan tried again, sending a caravan of 100 camels laden with precious goods looted from China. But when the caravan reached the Shah's territory, the local governor seized it and executed its leaders. Khan, believing this was a mistake made without the Shah's knowledge, sent yet another delegation to demand the governor's punishment and reiterate his offer of trade. This time, Muhammad had one of the ambassadors beheaded and sent the others back with shaved heads, a grave insult in Mongol culture. Khan's response was simple and chilling. "You have chosen war. What will happen, and what it is to be we know not, only God knows." What followed was the total annihilation of the Khwarezmian Empire. Genghis Khan mobilized his forces, which, though smaller than the Shah's, were faster and more disciplined. He executed the governor by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. Then he swept through the Shah's lands using novel tactics that baffled Muhammad's generals. The Mongols surrounded the capital, Samarkand, and seized it. Muhammad fled, dying a year later, his empire in ruins, his dynasty extinguished. He had made the fatal error of judging his opponent by appearance and assuming superiority. He did not know he was dealing with a man who would not rest until he had exacted total revenge. The world is full of different types of people, and the ability to distinguish between them is the highest form of the art of power. You must learn to recognize the wolf in sheep's clothing, and avoid offending those who will stop at nothing to destroy you. The arrogant and proud man is one such type. Any slight to his ego will result in a vengeance out of all proportion to the offense. To deal with him is dangerous. Flee if you sense his overactive pride. The hopelessly insecure man is another danger. If you deceive him, he will not attack openly but will simmer with resentment, nibbling away at you slowly over time. The serpent with a long memory is cold and calculating. If you cross him, he will wait years for the perfect moment to strike back. Contrast the Shah's folly with the wisdom of the con artist ring based in Denver in the 1920s. Led by Joe Fury, they targeted a wealthy Texas rancher named J. Frank Norfleet. They played him perfectly, introducing him to a stock exchange scam where he lost $45,000. Most victims of such swindles would be too embarrassed to go to the police or too intimidated to pursue the con men. Fury and his gang assumed Norfleet was just another mark. But they were wrong. Norfleet was not just a rich rancher, he was a man of immense determination and grit. Instead of slinking away in shame, Norfleet devoted his life to hunting down the men who had cheated him. He handed over the management of his ranch to his wife and set out across the country, masquerading as a buyer of everything from cotton to ostrich feathers to flush out the con artists. He tracked them from city to city, relentlessly. He found them in Florida, in Montreal, in Salt Lake City. He spent years and a fortune, but one by one he caught them. He even tracked Fury to a remote hideout. The gang had swindled hundreds of men, but in Norfleet they had picked the wrong victim, a man who would not give up until he had justice. It is critical to test your mark before you launch your scheme. A joke, a story, or a minor confrontation can reveal a great deal about a person's character. If they react with literalness and lack of humor, they may be the plain, unassuming, and often unintelligent man who is too dull to deceive and will waste your time. If they flare up with sudden anger, they may be the arrogant and proud type. Know who you are dealing with. Do not be misled by appearances. A man may look like a sheep, but possess the heart of a lion or the memory of a serpent. Never rely on your instincts alone when judging people. Gather concrete knowledge. Study their history, their reputation, and their reactions to pressure. If you offend the wrong person, no amount of apology will save you. You will have created an enemy for life, one who will haunt you long after you have forgotten the original offense. In the game of power, ignorance of your opponent is not a valid excuse. It is a death sentence. Chapter 20. Do not commit to anyone. It is the fool who invariably rushes to take sides. Do not commit to any side or cause but yourself. By maintaining your independence, you become the master of others, playing people against one another, making them pursue you. If you allow people to feel they possess you to any degree, you lose all power over them. By not committing your affections, they will only try harder to win you over. Stay aloof, and you gain the power that comes from their attention and frustrated desire. When Queen Elizabeth I ascended the throne of England in 1558, the nation was divided and weak, threatened by the great powers of France and Spain. The immediate pressure on the young queen was to marry. Parliament, her councillors, and the public all clamoured for a king who could secure the realm and provide an heir. The debate raged incessantly, with factions pushing for different suitors. A marriage to a foreign prince would forge a powerful alliance. A marriage to an English nobleman would satisfy local pride. But Elizabeth did neither. She understood that to commit to a husband was to lose her power. If she married a foreigner, England would be dragged into foreign wars and lose its autonomy. If she married a subject, she would elevate one faction above others, inciting jealousy and civil strife. Moreover, a husband would inevitably try to rule over her, as was the custom of the time. Instead, Elizabeth crafted a brilliant strategy of perpetual courtship. She turned her marriageability into a diplomatic weapon. For decades, she dangled the possibility of her hand before the most powerful men in Europe: Philip II of Spain, the Archduke Charles of Austria, the King of Sweden, and the French Dukes of Anjou and Alençon. She would encourage their advances, accept their ambassadors, and engage in elaborate negotiations, only to withdraw at the last moment with gracious excuses. When the Spanish threat loomed, she hinted at a French marriage. When France became too aggressive, she warmed to the Spanish. By keeping the hopes of these rival powers alive, she prevented them from uniting against England and bought her country valuable time to grow strong and wealthy. At home, she played the same game with her courtiers. Handsome and ambitious men like Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, and later the Earl of Essex, vied for her favour. She allowed them to get close, to dream of being the king consort, but she never let them cross the final line. She was the Virgin Queen, possessed by no man, mother to her people alone. This aura of unavailability made her the centre of attention and worship. She was the prize everyone sought, but no one could claim. Had she succumbed to the pressure and chosen a mate, she would have become merely a queen consort, her power diluted, her mystery vanished. By refusing to commit, she remained the absolute mistress of her fate and the dominant figure of her age. The second part of this law warns against rushing into the quarrels of others. When a conflict breaks out, the natural reaction is to choose a side, to join the fray. But the man of power stays back. He does not let himself be dragged into the mud by the emotions of the moment. By remaining neutral, you become a desirable ally to both sides, courting your favor. You can watch them exhaust themselves in battle, preserving your own energy, and then step in to dictate the terms when the dust settles. In the late 18th century, as the newly formed United States sought to establish itself, George Washington faced immense pressure to enter the conflicts of Europe. France, which had aided the American Revolution, demanded support in its wars against England. Many Americans, fueled by revolutionary fervor, wanted to join the French cause. Washington, however, saw that the young nation was too fragile to survive entanglement in European power struggles. He issued a proclamation of neutrality, declaring that the United States would remain friendly and impartial toward the belligerent powers. He refused to commit the nation's limited resources to a foreign war. This independence earned the respect of European nations, who were forced to treat the United States as a sovereign entity rather than a client state. Washington understood that true independence comes from self-reliance, not from leaning on the strength of others. The lesson is clear. Do not let people drag you into their petty fights or squander your energy on their causes. Preserve your autonomy. Let others court you, let them fight for your attention, but never let them feel they have captured you. The moment you commit, the magic is broken. You become taken for granted, a pawn in someone else's game. Maintain your inner distance, keep your options open, and you will remain in control. Chapter 21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. No one likes feeling stupider than the next person. The trick, then, is to make your victims feel smart, and not just smart, but smarter than you are. Once convinced of this, they will never suspect that you may have ulterior motives. In 1872, the American financier Asbury Harpending, then in London, received a cable from William Ralston, a prominent banker in California. It announced the discovery of a vast diamond mine in the American West. Harpending was initially skeptical, as was his associate, the fabulously wealthy Baron Rothschild. But the Baron, noting the size and surprises of America, urged Harpending not to be too dismissive. Harpending returned to San Francisco to find the city buzzing with rumors. Two weather-beaten prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, had stumbled upon the mine. They were crude, uneducated men who seemed overwhelmed by their discovery. They had already led a mining expert to the site, taking a circuitous route to confuse him, and he had returned with a sack of diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. The financiers, including the cream of San Francisco society, were hooked but cautious. They demanded that the gems be verified by Charles Tiffany in New York. The prospectors, acting like paranoid yokels, were reluctant to let the gems out of their sight, but eventually agreed. In New York, Tiffany examined the stones and declared them genuine and of great value. The financiers were ecstatic. They formed a $10 million corporation to exploit the mine. But first, they demanded one final inspection by the country's leading mining expert, Louis Janin. The prospectors, playing the role of simple men afraid of being cheated by city slickers, agreed only after securing a large down payment. Janin was led to the secret location in Wyoming. He dug up the ground and found diamonds, emeralds, and rubies at every turn. He was convinced. "With 100 men and proper machinery," he declared, "I would guarantee to send out $1 million in diamonds every 30 days. The deal was finalized. The prospectors were paid $700,000 for their rights and disappeared. It was only later that the truth emerged. The mine was a fraud. Arnold and Slack had salted the ground with low-quality industrial diamonds and rubies they had purchased in London and Amsterdam. They had played the part of the naive, suspicious prospectors so perfectly that no one, not the bankers, not Tiffany, not the mining expert, had suspected them capable of such a sophisticated deception. The financiers had been blinded by their own arrogance, believing they were far too smart to be duped by a pair of rube miners. This law strikes at the heart of intellectual vanity. Intelligence is the quality most people are proudest of. It is the engine of their self-worth. If you challenge someone's intelligence, you create an enemy. But if you validate it, if you make them feel superior, they let their guard down. By playing the fool, you disarm your victims. They assume that because you appear slow or naive, you lack the capacity for deception. This gives you the freedom to maneuver right under their noses. In 1865, Otto von Bismarck wanted Austria to sign a treaty that was heavily skewed in Prussia's favor. The Austrian negotiator, Count Blome, was a man who prided himself on his ability to read character through card games. Bismarck knew this. The night before the negotiations, he played a game of quinze with Blome. Bismarck played recklessly, making wild bets and foolish blunders. He lost, but he won the greater game. Blome concluded that Bismarck was a rash and aggressive fool, incapable of subtle calculation. The next day, expecting an easy victory, Blome signed the treaty without scrutinizing the fine print, believing he could outwit the foolish Prussian. Bismarck had played the sucker to catch the sucker. The ability to play dumb is a powerful tool in the arsenal of the strategist. It is a mask that hides your true intentions and abilities. If you are ambitious but low in the hierarchy, appearing a bit dull can protect you from the envy and suspicion of your superiors. They will not see you as a threat. They may even promote you, thinking you are a harmless and loyal plodder. This was the strategy of Claudius, who survived the murderous intrigues of the Roman imperial family by playing the role of an imbecile, only to become emperor himself. Intelligence is not the only quality you can downplay. You can also seem less sophisticated or less tasteful than your mark. This makes them feel worldly and refined, feeding their ego while you lead them into your trap. The key is to subsume your own vanity. It is painful to act stupider than you are, to let others sneer at your apparent lack of wit. But you must swallow this pride. The ultimate victory belongs not to the one who shines the brightest in the moment, but to the one who controls the outcome. By seeming the fool, you become the master of the game, while the arrogant geniuses are left holding a bag of worthless rocks. Chapter 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you are weaker, never fight for honor's sake. Choose surrender instead. Surrender gives you time to recover. Time to torment and irritate your conqueror. Time to wait for his power to wane. Do not give him the satisfaction of fighting and defeating you. Surrender first. By turning the other cheek, you infuriate and unsettle him. Make surrender a tool of power. The island of Melos was strategically situated in the heart of the Mediterranean. In classical times, when Athens was the dominant power, Melos refused to align itself with the great city, remaining loyal to its mother state Sparta. In 416 BC, the Athenians sent a massive expedition against Melos. Before launching their attack, they sent a delegation to negotiate. They offered the Melians a choice: become an ally and pay tribute to Athens, or be destroyed. The Athenians were blunt. They told the Melians that justice is only an issue between equals in power. Otherwise, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. The Melians, proud and stubborn, refused to accept this logic. They argued that the gods would protect them because their cause was just. They insisted that Sparta would come to their aid to preserve its own honor. The Athenians scoffed at this naivete, pointing out that the Spartans were a practical people who would not risk their own safety to save a small island. They urged the Melians not to be led astray by a false sense of honor, which often leads men to ruin when faced with a danger they cannot possibly overcome. But the Melians would not yield. They politely declined the offer. The Athenians immediately laid siege to the city. The Melians fought bravely, but the Spartans never came. Eventually, Melos surrendered. The Athenians showed no mercy. They killed every man of military age, sold the women and children into slavery, and repopulated the island with their own colonists. The Melians had chosen the honor of resistance, and it cost them their existence. Contrast this with the actions of the German playwright Bertolt Brecht. In the years following World War II, a wave of anti-communist hysteria swept through the United States. The House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, began to summon writers, directors, and actors to testify about their political beliefs. Among them was Brecht, who had fled Hitler's Germany and was writing screenplays in Hollywood. Brecht had known communist sympathies. His works were fiercely anti-capitalist. His fellow intellectuals, the Hollywood 19, decided to resist. They planned to be hostile witnesses, to argue with the committee, to challenge its authority, and to play the role of martyrs. Brecht, however, chose a different path. He knew that arguing with power when you are weak is suicide. When he appeared before the committee, he did not shout or protest. He wore a suit, smoked a cigar, and was unfailingly polite. He answered their questions with ambiguous, sphinx-like deferral. When asked if he had written a certain revolutionary poem, he replied that he had written many poems and could not remember every one. He confused the committee with subtle language, making them feel that he was cooperating while actually giving them nothing. He even made them laugh. In the end, the committee thanked him for being a good witness and let him go. Brecht was free. He immediately flew to Europe, where he continued to write and produce his plays for years, his reputation and his work intact. The Hollywood 19, who had fought for their honor, were blacklisted, their careers ruined, their voices silenced. The lesson here is that outward weakness can be an inner strength. When you are the weaker party, fighting back only confirms your weakness and justifies the aggressor's violence. It gives them the battle they want. Surrender, on the other hand, denies them their victory. It lulls them into a false sense of security. By yielding, you control the dynamic. You wrap your enemy in a net of docility, all the while waiting for the moment when they are off guard or their power wanes. The oak tree that resists the wind is broken. The bamboo that bends survives to stand tall again when the storm has passed. Do not confuse surrender with weakness or cowardice. It is a strategic maneuver, like the hedgehog playing dead or the opossum going limp. You are conserving your energy and masking your intentions. You are buying time. Time to plan, time to gather strength, time to let your enemy overreach and destroy himself. In the game of power, the only thing that matters is long-term survival and ultimate victory. If you must bow your head and bend your knee to achieve it, do so with a smile. Your submission is not a reality. It is a mask behind which you sharpen your knife. Chapter 23. Concentrate your forces. Conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. You gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find the one key patron, the fat cow who will give you milk for a long time to come. In the chaotic world of power, the natural tendency is to disperse your energy. You want to be everywhere, do everything, and please everyone. This is a fatal error. The mind that scatters itself in many directions becomes weak and ineffective. To survive and thrive, you must do the opposite. You must concentrate. Like an arrow that pierces a target because all its force is focused on a single point, you must bring all your resources to bear on a single challenge or a single source of power. The supreme example of this law in action is the House of Rothschild. For more than a century, this banking dynasty dominated the finances of Europe, wielding more power than kings and emperors. Their incredible success was not a matter of luck. It was the result of a deliberate strategy of concentration established by the family patriarch, Meyer Amschel Rothschild. Born in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Meyer Amschel knew the dangers of being an outsider in a hostile world. He knew that if his family were to survive, they had to be unbreakable. Meyer Amschel had 5 sons. As they grew, he brought them into the business, teaching them the art of finance. But his most important lesson was delivered on his deathbed. He gathered his sons around him and told them the fable of the bundle of arrows. He asked them to try to break a bundle of arrows bound together. None could do it. Then he untied the bundle and showed them how easily a single arrow could be snapped. His dying command was that they remain united. They were to disperse across Europe to the 5 great capitals, Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. But they were to operate as one entity. The brothers followed his instructions with religious fervor. They established a communication system that was faster and more reliable than that of any government. They shared intelligence, funds, and strategies. If one branch was in trouble, the others would rush to its aid. Most importantly, they concentrated their wealth within the family. They refused to take on outside partners, and to seal this bond, they even practiced endogamy, marrying their cousins to ensure that their secrets and their fortune never leaked out to strangers. While other banking families spread themselves thin, diluted their power with outsiders, and fought internal squabbles, the Rothschilds concentrated their forces. They moved through the financial markets of Europe like a single terrifying machine, destroying competitors and financing wars that reshaped the continent. This law applies not just to families or armies, but to the individual seeking a patron. The world is full of people who flit from one master to another, hoping to gain a little here and a little there. They end up with nothing. The smart courtier finds the fat cow, the one patron who has the wealth and the stability to support them for the long haul. Once found, they bury themselves in this relationship, making themselves indispensable. They mine this single source of power until they have extracted every ounce of value. Michelangelo understood this well. During the Renaissance, most artists scrambled for commissions from various minor nobles and bishops. Michelangelo, however, concentrated his energies on the papacy. He served Pope Julius II, then Leo VI, then Clement VII. By attaching himself to the supreme power in Italy, he gained resources and protection that no minor duke could offer. He did not waste his time courting a dozen lesser masters. He concentrated on the one that mattered. In the end, power is a finite resource. If you spread it too thin, it dissipates. You cannot fight on every front. You cannot be loyal to every master. You must learn to say no to the distractions and the minor opportunities that clutter your path. Withdraw into yourself, gather your strength, and strike only when you can do so with overwhelming force. The single light beam of a laser can cut through steel, while the dispersed light of a lamp can only illuminate a room. Be the laser. Chapter 24. Play the perfect courtier. The perfect courtier thrives in a world where everything revolves around power and political dexterity. He has mastered the art of indirection. He flatters, yields to superiors, and asserts power over others in the most oblique and graceful manner. The court has always been a place of mutual dependence and dangerous games, a civilized war where the weapons are charm, deception, and subtle strategy. In the past, the court gathered around the ruler, glorifying him and providing a microcosmic world that struggled to please him. Today, while royal courts may have diminished, the court of power remains. The laws that govern court politics are as timeless as the laws of power themselves, requiring a delicate balance of elegance and manipulation. To survive and rise in this treacherous environment, one must master the laws of court politics. The first rule is to avoid ostentation. It is never prudent to prattle on about yourself or call too much attention to your actions. The more you talk about your deeds, the more suspicion you cause and the more envy you stir up among your peers. Modesty is generally preferable. Simultaneous with this is the practice of nonchalance. Your talent must appear to flow naturally, with an ease that makes people take you for a genius rather than a workaholic. Even when something demands a lot of sweat, make it look effortless. People prefer not to see your blood and toil. They want to marvel at how gracefully you have achieved your accomplishments. Flattery is a potent weapon, but it must be used with frugality. Too much of even a good thing loses its value and stirs up suspicion. Learn to flatter indirectly, perhaps by downplaying your own contribution to make your master look better. While you must not display yourself too brazenly, you must also arrange to be noticed. You stand no chance of rising if the ruler does not notice you in the swamp of courtiers. Pay attention to your physical appearance and find a way to create a subtly distinctive style. Furthermore, alter your style and language according to the person you are dealing with. The belief in equality is a terrible mistake in court. You must change your way of speaking to suit each person, an art that requires acting rather than lying. Never be the bearer of bad news. The king kills the messenger who brings bad news. This is a cliché because it is true. You must struggle to ensure that the lot of the bearer of bad news falls on a colleague, never on you. Bring only good news, and your approach will gladden your master. Additionally, never affect friendliness and intimacy with your master. He does not want a friend for a subordinate, he wants a subordinate. Assume a wary chumminess if he chooses to deal with you on that level, but otherwise err in the opposite direction and make the distance between you clear. Do not criticize those above you directly. Couch your advice and criticism as indirectly and politely as possible, using symbols or subtle hints rather than naked truth. Be frugal in asking those above you for favors. Nothing irritates a master more than having to reject a request, which stirs up guilt and resentment. Earn your favors so that they are bestowed willingly, and never ask for favors on another person's behalf. Avoid jokes about appearance or taste, two highly sensitive areas. A lively wit is essential, but do not become the court cynic. Express modest admiration for the good work of others rather than constantly criticizing, which only brings a grey cloud over your own reputation. Be self-observant, using your mind as a mirror to see yourself as others see you, avoiding obsequiousness or desperation. Master your emotions, disguising anger and frustration, and fit the spirit of the times. Finally, be a source of pleasure. Since life is full of unpleasantness, the person who brings charm and delight becomes indispensable. History provides many examples of the triumphs and failures of courtiers. Alexander the Great, despite his love for philosophy, executed Callisthenes for speaking his mind too freely. Honest criticism is a fool's game in court. In contrast, Chinese scholars found a way to warn their emperors of mistakes not by direct criticism, but by inserting descriptions of strange natural phenomena into official chronicles, signaling that the emperor's actions were unbalancing the universe. This indirect approach allowed the emperor to realize his errors without personal offense. The French architect Jules Mansart rose to favor with Louis XIV by intentionally leaving flaws in his designs for the king to correct. By allowing Louis to feel the superior architect, Mansart secured his position through strategic flattery. Jean-Baptiste Isabey, a painter at the Congress of Vienna, faced the impossible task of satisfying both the Duke of Wellington and Talleyrand in a single painting. He succeeded by placing Wellington at the point of entry where all eyes turned, while seating Talleyrand in the center of the canvas. Both men felt honored, and a diplomatic rift was avoided. Conversely, Beau Brummel, the arbiter of fashion, died in poverty because he dared to joke about the Prince of Wales's weight. Not even the closest friendship can withstand a wound to a master's vanity. In the court of ancient China, a crown keeper was executed for placing a coat over the sleeping ruler, a task assigned to the coat keeper. Doing more than your assigned duty creates suspicion rather than reward. Fra Filippo Lippi saved himself from slavery by painting a magnificent portrait of his Moorish captor, using his talent to buy his freedom. Alfonso I of Aragon taught a greedy servant a lesson by granting a dream of small gifts but rejecting a dream of gold, showing that a master gives when he wants, not when prompted. And the great painter J.M.W. Turner learned to dim his brilliant colors to avoid outshining his patron's work, a temporary sacrifice that secured his long-term favor. These courtiers understood that the game of power requires constant vigilance, subtle manipulation, and the ability to make the master shine.